Killer background.
Mm.
That is, I'm right there. So Sam, I'll turn it over to you. Why don't you start us up?
Great, thank you. Welcome, commissioners, and we do have a couple consultants joining us throughout the next couple days, and I just see that Jim Darling joined us here, and he and Lisa Parks have a presentation to go over later in the agenda. So we're going to start out with, I'm going to turn this over to Holly here to start out with, welcoming and going over agenda, et cetera. I do want to start the meeting and recognizing that there were some difficulties with the provision of the Zoom link, and to assure the commission that that has been corrected. So the Zoom link for the meeting is up on the website. It was sent out to everybody in our mailer list, but it was a mistake not to have it on our website. It has been corrected. So and we're taking steps to make sure that it doesn't happen again in the future. So want to recognize that technical difficulty there, and say, it was a mistake on our part. We've corrected it, and I think everybody that wants to join us now is able to join us.
Great, thank you, Sam. Yeah, this is these are definitely strange times. I've been working a lot in the online environment, and one thing is certain is that mistakes are happening. They're happening all the time, every which way but loose. Trying to move everybody into this online environment has really required, I think it's required an extra sense of humor. That's what I'll say. I ran for the Whatcom County government, I ran a 144 member task force this summer.
Wow.
And so it was all these businesses and organizations and government trying to figure out how to cope with the changing regulations around COVID. And, what can you say about mistakes will be made, right? We are all doing our best.
Thanks.
So I want to start this retreat just with that spirit and that invitation, which is that I really think that the stress for everybody right now is so high, and that the best thing we can do when we show up in these spaces together is to just offer each other a lot of grace and an appreciation for the fact that really the privilege that we get to even be here together is amazing. And to hold that space with such respect for each other, respect for other people who are joining us today, and respect for the people who can't be here. So I think that what I've been practicing in my own work is just showing up at meetings, being the very best Holly I can be, and leaving my snitty, obnoxious, judgmental Holly back at the house. So that's how I'm going to invite us all to show up today, because I have had so much fun with all of you. And for Jim and Lisa, you guys, if you've not already worked with this commission, they are so great, and they're so smart, and they care so much about this port, and all the staff as well. So we're so pleased to have you here. We're going to do a little round of introductions, but again, what I expect from all of you is to really make this an excellent time together. We'll raise hands to be recognized to speak. Please keep your mute button on and your camera on. So if you have to quickly, I don't know, blow your nose or something, you can turn off your camera. Otherwise, keep your camera on. And I think we're just going to go ahead and get started with some intros, and then we'll pop up the agenda. So for the introductions, your name, your position, how long you've been in that position, and any little details you want to share about that. And then in your own life, what is one thing that has been challenging? And I want to short, this is just 2 minutes. One thing that's been challenging, and one thing that's been an unexpected gift from being in this crazy time of the pandemic. Okay, so one little challenge and one unexpected gift. And Joe, and you can pass if you're not ready to start, but Joe, would you be game to start? Commissioner Downing?
You're muted, Commissioner.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I was aiming for the wrong unmute button. Anyway, I'm Commissioner Joe Downing. I've been in this position 5 years. I love the port. It's a great organization. I have fun relating with everybody at the port. And what's a challenging thing in life?
Well, just in COVID, in your time of this.
Oh, in the
pandemic,
COVID
what's one
world,
thing
a
that's been
challenge.
especially
A challenge,
challenging?
okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, a challenge is really the lack of face-to-face social interaction, not
Mhm.
being able to even meet people for coffee or having to search out places where we can sit outside because, different places have different rules, but, the general rule is no indoor anything. So we try really hard to abide by that. And, at this point, the challenge has morphed into trying to stay COVID free until we get the actual 2 vaccines in us, which personally have not got any. So, and so looking forward to that. I guess the gift of the pandemic is quality time with your significant other, and I guess that's a two-edged sword because I've met some people who things have fallen apart, but if they don't fall apart, then you get closer together. So I think that's one of the gifts of the pandemic is to slow down life and appreciate the little things and the simple pleasures, really. And so that's one of the gifts.
Yay, thank you. And Zita, do you want to go, Commissioner Zita?
So I'm Zita. I'm a cattle rancher. You can see I'm in the pasture with the cattle right now. My background is in physics and climate and sustainability. A challenge has been that my partner sees patients, including COVID patients. So that's scary for me and stressful for her. And people's behaviors and choices are scary and stressful. And a gift is that I don't have to drive all over the county to meetings. Zoom is more efficient in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Thank you. Bill?
Okay, well, I'm Bill McGregor. I've been on the Port Commission for 15 years now, and I several challenges. One has been my wife and I do foster care, have done it for a number of years, but with the pandemic and the fact that my wife and I are both of the age we are, we have not been taking children as of late just because we don't know the background. They haven't been tested before they've been brought into our house, and we don't want to contact something that could really seriously hurt our health. And so we're healthy, we're staying home. The gift, most of it, well, the other challenge is, as the commissioners have already stated, is getting out and meeting people and seeing people and shaking hands and, being able to relate, because Zoom does work. It keeps you home. It doesn't mean you have to be running around. You don't have to burn as much fuel or spend as much time on the road, but certainly is a challenge to develop relationships. And the gift is more time with my wife. Whether she might agree with that or not, I don't know. And the other one is I'm spending a lot of time working around the house, getting caught up on the honey-do list. So that's, thank you.
Nice. Thank you. Sam?
So Sam Gibney, Executive Director, and I just passed my 2-year mark here at the Port of Olympia. And challenged during this time, certainly the lack of contact, etc. I haven't hugged my 20-year-old son in quite a long time, which is probably okay with him. But for me, his mom is missing him, and We have been able to see each other, but only at a distance. And the unexpected benefit is I'm in the same camp as the commissioners. Is thankfully my husband is even funnier than I knew him to be, and he's a better poet than I knew him to be before. So yeah, count the lucky ones is the time together is been enriching.
Yeah, thank you. So there's going to be, I'm going to have the other 4 people who are in the panelists group speak, also introduce themselves, and then we'll pop up the agenda and get started. So Jerry, do you want to pop on your camera just for a moment? And I'm assuming that's you. There you are. Hi. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I sure can. I'm Jerry Severe, the Administrative Services Director, and my bubble or picture up here on the Hollywood Squares is only here because I own the account and they won't let me promote down or demote down to an attendee at this point in time. So I'm just on here, but we'll be participating later as Sam brings us in. And, you know, to answer your questions, I miss going into the office and seeing people. So, you know, we do that a couple days a week, and it's nice when people are there and we can actually interact in person. I think there's a lot of stuff that gets missed in those, you know, hallway conversations that we don't get to have anymore. So it takes a lot more work to communicate and understand what everyone's working on and who's doing what. And so by that means we have a lot more emails, which then takes a lot of time. So for that part, I'm not really happy about the online stuff. But, you know, as far as being able to get up and get started early in the morning without having to commute back and forth, that's pretty nice. And being able to work at home a few days is nice. I'm unlike most of you, my family is not here. My husband's working out of town and my daughter went back to school. So I'm now all by myself in this house with a cat. So like, so I'm more lonely, want to go to work more, I guess, but.
A cat that she doesn't like is what she's leaving out.
Oh, thank you. That's great. Aspen, do you want to go?
I'm Aspen Humison. I'm the Executive and Commission Coordinator. And one challenge that I've been facing with this pandemic is really just living through such an unexpected event. I mean, it's a lot of highs and lows. I feel like we went through a period where things were getting better and then they were getting worse, and just grasping all of that has been a challenge in itself. But one unexpected positive that's come out of it is that I was able to see my family and spend a lot of time with them about a month ago.
Mm.
And there's a couple weeks ago, but I was with them for about a month. So I hadn't seen my family in about 1.5 years. So it was really nice to be able to spend a lot of time with them.
Nice. Thank you. Okay, so then our panelists, Jim Darling, you and I worked on a project in Whatcom County. I think it was 1,000 years ago, but I'm feeling like old when I look at you, like, because that was over 20 years, I think. But good to see you. Welcome. Yeah.
So yeah, it was a long time ago. So I'm Jim Darling. I know most of you. I've been associated with Mall Foster Nalanji for about a little over 10 years now. Can you hear me okay?
Your volume's a little low, but it's okay.
Let me see here.
Maybe try and get a little closer.
Yeah. Is that any better? Not so good?
Yeah, just speak in full volume. We'll
Okay,
be fine.
I'll do that. Anyways, I as you know, I've been with Mall Foster for about a little over 10 years. Prior to that, I was at the Port of Bellingham as executive director, and I was there for 18 years. And prior to that, I was a public works director in the Midwest. And I was thinking about the challenges. I'm a little bit like Sam. I have 2 grown boys and worrying about them. We've fortunately been able to see them. One of them got COVID, came through it fine. The other one's super safe, not tracked anything. And the gift it's given me is that my wife and I, looking for things to do, I finally convinced her to buy that 1975 retro stereo and about 20 old vinyl albums. So, which was prohibited in the house for the last 35 years. So that was a good thing. So, and we're glad to be here.
Great. Thank you. Welcome. Lisa? We can't hear you yet.
You're muted. Nope.
Lisa, it's still not working. It doesn't show that you're muted on the panel, but something's funky. Something's not working. Mm.
Hmm.
Try again. Okay, so you might have to sign off, sign back on, and use the phone dial-in.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. And this is, I mean, this is like the world now, right? You just have to be super patient. I always just go into meetings assuming things will go badly in terms of the tech, because they usually do. So, you know, we just are just gonna roll with it. Let's see, if you, Aspen, can go ahead and put up the agenda. We'll go through that. And if you can make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so you, hopefully we're all had a chance to review the packet, but our intentions today are to set the course for the year ahead with common understanding of how we work together to fulfill the mission of the port, and really just make sure we're all on the same page as we move forward. I thought it might be good to read the mission of the port, so I'm going to read it for you. The mission of the Port of Olympia is to create economic opportunities by connecting Thurston County to the world by air, land, and sea. So lovely. And so what we've got for the first part of today is we're going to hear from Lisa and Jim of MFA about the tools and methodologies for organizational assessment, and take a break about halfway through that and then have their second half. And then Sam is going to talk about what that all means for us in terms of strengthening our own strategic leadership of the port. So we'll have some time for that, just to take it home. Take another break, and then we're going to do a review of the processes that we have established for coordinating our work together, which is what I've been working with you all on for the last year or two, of just making sure that the commission itself and the commission relationship to staff is smooth and transparent and clear and effective. And I think you all have done some great work on that, getting it into your rules. And so we're just going to do a refresher, make sure we're all remembering how we play the game. If you can go ahead and scroll down, please. Yep. So we'll be wrapping up at 4:15 and adjourning at 4:30. Again, I have breaks scheduled in here, but if at any point we just need to stop and take a break, we will do so. If we get a little bit off track, or you're feeling, like we really need to shift gears, let me know, and I will help us navigate through that. I want to shift to day 2, please, and keep scrolling. So after we have this kind of getting our feet under us with all that, we'll do a check-in starting at 12:30 tomorrow. And then we're going to have Anne with us from Jurassic Parliament to do a refresher on that, which is always enjoyable. I don't know if she's going to bring the little dinosaurs onto the Zoom with her or not, but that certainly is a big part of the fun with Anne. So we've got that for the first part of our day, and then the second part of our day is the planning. So that's when we'll have all the staff up with us on the screen giving presentations, so that we can have a sense of what the plan is for the year ahead. So that is the agenda for our time together. Do you have any questions before we start? Okay. Well, again, just remember to enjoy yourselves, and we're going to have a good time. This is going to be a great retreat. And I'm going to turn it over now to Jim and Lisa. So let's pull the screen off for a minute. And Jim, let's see, did Lisa make it back on? Lisa, let's test your sound.
Can you hear me now?
Ah! Yes.
That,
Okay.
that
So
is,
the floor is, yay. The floor
Yes.
is yours.
Yeah, and that is a regular occurrence. It seems to be for me when I switch between Zoom and Teams and go to meetings, and yeah, my microphone can't keep up all the time. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'll introduce myself real quickly, but then if it's okay, either Jerry or Aspen, if I could share my screen. We updated, just made some minor tweaks to the presentation for today. So anyway, my name's Lisa Parks. I'm a planner with Mall Foster and Alonji. I've been here for just over a year. I actually live in Olympia, and I commute when we were commuting to the Seattle office a couple of days a week. Prior to that, I was the executive director at the Port of Douglas County for almost 9 years. And my background in education is actually in land use and environmental planning. I had my own consulting firm in the Wenatchee Valley for about 11 years, working for cities, counties, ports, and PUDs. And then I spent 2 years as the community development director for the city of Leavenworth, and about 7 years in my early part of my career as a natural resources planner, senior planner for Douglas County. So that is my background. My challenge has been learning to be in a new community and in a new job for only 4 months before being homebound. That's been a challenge, but the gift has been an extra 8 to 12 hours a week, not having to commute to Seattle and back for my job. So thank you, and my apologies for the technical difficulties, but I think if we can go ahead and Jim, you want to say anything before we get started while I'm trying to
While she's setting that up, and how's the audio, Holly? Is it okay now?
Yeah, it's not terrific. I can hear you, but you're like a degree quieter.
That's interesting. I don't know why that is. Anyways, I'll try to speak up. So, but if somebody give me this sign if for some reason you can't hear me. So
I'll help you out there.
okay. So we're gonna we have a presentation to guide our discussion today, and then right after the break, a little bit more discussion. And as you see, we're going to start out and talk a little bit about some fundamental principles that both Lisa and I, as well as a lot of you, have discovered in your journey in the port industry in Washington State. And I think it's always good to take a step back and get a little bit of clarity. So we're going to walk through these, and we have some survey information about what other ports are doing that is very new last fall. And I think you'll find that pretty interesting as well. So I think, Lisa, you're going to kick it off, and then I'll jump in a few slides.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. And Holly, can you remind me, just so I can keep track, what time is this portion of the agenda anticipated to be done?
Yeah, you have 45 minutes for the first section.
Okay, I just need to know when I need to do a virtual kick for Jim to move along.
Okay.
Just joking. We enjoy each other and have a great time doing this. And as he mentioned, a lot of what we're sharing today are mutually shared experiences and understanding and tools that we've both used in our roles as executive directors at port districts. And we hope to share those with you and hope that you can use them. So the first part of the day before the break, we're going to talk just a little bit about governance and management, the concepts behind those, as well as these tools that we just mentioned. And then we're also going to, in part 2, then after the break, we're going to explore the tools that we're going to talk about and show you examples and case studies of how those different tools can be implemented. So Jim, you want to talk and kick us off here?
So just by way of introduction, I have a master's in public administration. So Northcote Parkinson is my hero. Wasn't baseball players growing up. It was a public administrator. He was a naval historian in Britain and considered to be the grandfather of modern public administration. And a lot of the concepts that we have in the United States about local government and the difference between governance and management come from Northcote's work. He's got this famous law of triviality that says if you the bigger or the smaller the budget item, the more time you spend on it in a board meeting. Just real brief from my experience, one time city council, we were buying $400 in radios and spent an hour and a half talking about that. And we had a $4 million storm sewer bond that took 5 minutes. And it's just sort of the nature of the beast, what people can relate to. So with that, go ahead. So it's one thing that we wanted to make sure we capture for you, just as a reminder of where the authority for Washington ports comes from. It originates in the 10th Amendment to the Constitution that says whatever the feds don't do, states can do. They're reserved for states. And then the states, like Washington State, through the RCWs, have created legislatively Washington ports, like a number of local governments. Ports are limited purpose governments, and we always need to remember that. They can only do the stuff that's on the list that they can do. I worked in Illinois. Illinois is the exact opposite. In city government in Illinois, you can do anything you want. You can't build parks, believe it or not. So they have separate park districts like school districts in Illinois. And then, as you know, almost all of our authority in ports is in Chapter 53, but also a lot of it comes from a reasonable inference from other laws in the statute, particularly Chapter 39 that applies to municipalities. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, so we wanted to talk just a little bit about the difference between governance and leadership, just so we're governance and leadership and management, so we're kind of all on the same terms. Generally, it's not uncommon to see those terms used interchangeably, but they really are two different things. So leadership or governance is setting the stage, articulating the vision, whereas management is actually putting the vision into action and making it happen. So in our leadership and governance practice, we develop the goals and state what they should be. And then our management tool and the management arm of our organizations really is responsible for implementing those goals and making sure that they are executed. So success in local government, and it really in any organization, is it requires both leadership, governance, and the management component. So it's important to have both pieces in terms of how the organization moves forward. And most importantly, it's really important for a successful organization to have clarity and understanding and alignment between those two components. So the first step towards alignment in a port district is often clarifying the roles of commission and staff. It's easy enough for me to stand here in my home office and say, one of you sets the goal and the other one implements it, but there's a lot of different things that go into that. And so it's important to have the individual conversation at the organization to determine basically who's doing what. So for port districts then, the governance and management roles are usually pretty straightforward, at least on the surface. So the commission is the elected government. They perform sort of the governance and leadership role. Commissioners set the vision, whereas staff then performs that management role. They are taking the day-to-day actions that are implementing the vision and the goals of the governance group, the elected officials. And the executive director is essentially the conduit between those two different components of the organization, and has functions within both of those. So one of the things I want to emphasize, though, is at the management level, it doesn't mean that there isn't leadership that happens within your management, within your staff. There certainly is, but in terms of the organization, our focus is more on understanding from an organizational perspective who's doing what. So what we hope to do today is introduce some tools that really help create that clarity and alignment around the governance and management of the Port of Olympia. And Jim, I would like for you to talk about the quote on this slide, knowing when to lead and when to be led a little bit.
So I've been around the port industry for quite a while now, and I can tell you almost to a circumstance, and I know a number of you have as well, I've been both staff and commission. Knowing when to lead and when to be led is probably the golden rule in ports. And I think it's also applicable to school districts and a few other entities. But almost in every case in our state where an executive director and the commission have parted company, it's the complaint you'll always hear from a commission is, well, they were way out in front of the commission and we're in charge and they're not. And then, or the other thing you'll hear is, well, they weren't leading us, they weren't taking us anywhere. And finding that balance and knowing, it's sort of like playing tennis, right? You need to know when to do a forehand or a backhand, and it's an intuitive thing. But I consider that to be the golden rule. And I always used it as when I was a port director, to know when the commission wanted leadership, but when the commission needed to give me leadership and follow their lead. So it's something to keep in mind as you move forward. So in the next slide, I couldn't help to do the sailing thing. I mean, we're ports after all. So, you know, in the old, and I got this actually from some work we did with Lloyd's of London in London on an environmental insurance claim. And I finally read the history of Lloyd's of London and found out what the old role of a captain was on cargo ships. The captain was the one that sets the course, the mission, and the business purpose of the trip, the voyage. And they're a lot like the commission. They set the course and the direction. The boatswain, which has been shortened out of bosun, in the old days was responsible for running all the rigging and operating the vessel and getting it to where the captain wanted to go. And this is not dissimilar now to what the executive and director and staff do. You know, they're in charge of hoisting the sails and running the rudder. The captain decides, the commission decides where we're going and what market. So it's just, I always thought it was a good analogy to use. So in achieving alignment for ports, there's two things I think to be mindful of. One is to balance process with culture, and the other is culture. Organizational process is all the rules and stuff that you do, and we capture it in what we call keystone documents, like the delegation of powers, for example. Organizational culture is that underlying relationship, values, and beliefs that people work together on. And those need to be in balance for an organization to work at its optimum efficiency. And we're going to talk a little bit later on about keystone documents and why they're so critical. And they're part of the tools that you have to move the organization. It's interesting, there's some theory, by the way, that the greater your culture, the less procedure you need. The stronger your culture. Fire departments, I will tell you, work with a great deal of culture, and they have less and less procedural process written down because their cultures are so strong. It's kind of interesting. So in strategic direction, I found this years ago, and I always love this. You know, you always hear about getting up on the bluff and looking at the whole battlefield. Well, the great analogy is you're in the swamp. Where are we? Climb a tree and take a look. And go ahead. And not only we're on the wrong path, we're in the wrong jungle. So it's really important, I think, that a lot of ports end up hacking away through the density of the jungle of all the complex issues you have, and then realize that you're not even in the right jungle. And so it's really important to fly up to 30,000 feet occasionally, like you're doing now, and taking a look. It's very, very critical, and you're to be congratulated for that.
So kind of building a little bit more on some of the components of a good organization. The other thing that we're thinking about in terms of strategic thinking is where are you on the strategic thinking spectrum? There's basically two ends of that spectrum. On the one hand, data and information that you're looking at creates a solid foundation of understanding where you are in your community and in your organization. But it is focused, just by virtue of the nature of data and analysis, it's looking backwards. So it's focused on the past, what has happened in the past. On the other end of the spectrum, there is vision, which is more, you know, the ability to think about or plan for the future with some imagination and wisdom. So it's focused forward in terms of looking at what could be in for your port district and your community. So as with governance and management, it's important to have both ends of the spectrum to understand where you fall, both personally, I think, as well as an organization, and then how best to balance those different tools. And depending on what the topic is, you may look more at data and analysis than vision, or in other circumstances and other instances, such as strategic thinking, you really want to pull on that on the vision side of that spectrum. So Jim likes to point out the fact that does anybody recognize the photograph on the right-hand side of the slide? Has anybody been to the Gorge Amphitheater? Kind of in the general vicinity of George Washington. So the story there is if the people who implemented and developed the Gorge Amphitheater were looking at data and analysis only, there is absolutely nothing that would have told them to do this project. It's in the middle of nowhere. There's no surrounding, identifiable market specifically that would take advantage of these resources. It's an example of a truly visionary effort that really succeeded and likely would not have happened if they had only looked backwards in terms of data and analysis and trends. So thinking more just a little bit about strategic planning and forward thinking, Jim and I both, I believe, are pretty clear that a concise strategic plan is one of the most effective ways of creating alignment within a port district, or for any organization, again, for that matter. We do strategic planning for a lot of different types of organizations in the public sector. But a well thought out strategic plan helps the organization articulate its overall mission and values to those that they serve. And it looks at the different tools that they're going to use in order to be able to get there in terms of planned strategies and tactics. The goals, mission, and values are clearly within that governance realm and are often those things that are identified and developed and articulated by the commission. That's where the commission spends a lot of time, whereas the planned strategies and the tactics are more the arena of the management function within the organization. What you see where they come together, similarly to the executive director providing the conduit between management and leadership and governance, the budget is a clear expression of the priorities that an organization is establishing around those different values by allocating resources, whether that's staff and or financial resources, to the different goals and priorities that you have for your organization. So it's important as you're doing that kind of strategic thinking that you're also thinking about why it is you are doing what you're doing. It's really easy to jump forward and say, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and we need to get it done by the end of the year. But you need to be able to clearly communicate why it is you're doing what you're doing. I think that from my own perspective, as a person working in the public sector for over 30 years, that's the role, that's what makes public sector work different, is you are obligated to a community to perform and implement their goals and missions that they have for their overall community. And it's important that you're transparent in doing that. And then people can understand why it is you're doing what you're doing, not just what it is that you do day to day. So we wanted to kind of let those concepts of governance and management and strategic planning sit for just a minute and give you some context about what it is in terms of what ports in Washington State, what are other ports in Washington State doing? So twice now, the MFA has worked with WPPA to do a survey of port districts throughout the state. And both times, the first time in 2015-16, as well as just this last fall, we had really good participation from port districts and got it wasn't 100%, but it was pretty dang close to a good percentage of respondents to our different questions. And really the idea is we wanted to find out, as did WPPA, what are ports doing, and we wanted to be able to share that back out with port districts. One of the things that is so valuable about WPPA and the port community at large in Washington State is the way in which they support and network and communicate with each other. If there's a port district, if you're doing something and struggling with an issue, there is likely another port district in the state that has had a similar issue. So just a couple of slides here that talk a little bit about what ports are doing. So lots of water related port activities. It's what people typically think of when you say port district. If they don't know anything at all, they're going to think about marinas and marine terminals. So 52% of the respondents are working in recreational marinas. 34% have commercial marinas. 56% have boat launches. Even the Port of Douglas in the inland portion of central Washington has a boat launch. So there's a lot of different water-related port activities that are happening throughout the state. And these are ports of all sizes, the big ports as well as the smaller ports. In terms of landside port activities, so airports and commercial real estate and different types of airports, you could see the results here. A good share of port districts are involved in industrial real estate and commercial real estate. That's a function of the economic development focus for port districts. The aviation is another big component. So commercial aviation, these are Part 139 certified airports that have commercial passenger service. There's 4% of port districts that responded. There are several other port districts working in general aviation. So at the Port of Douglas County, we had the honor of being the only port district in the state that owned 3 airports. 2 of them were very small GA airports with not a lot happening, but we held that individual distinction in Washington State. And then the other activities that port districts work in, obviously economic development, that's a big function of what port districts were set up to do and authorized to do initially. Several ports get involved in environmental cleanup, taking contaminated properties and getting them back into some sort of a beneficial use for the community, whether that's economically or from a public access point of view. And a lot of port districts are doing parks and public access. So lots of different activities that the ports are working within. So what we want to do now is talk a little bit further about generally how ports are operating in Washington State. And so Jim talked earlier about keystone documents, and there are several keystone documents, the term that we use that are common to port districts. Some keystone documents are required by statute, others are more in the realm of best practices. And again, we're advocates of putting all of these things into place to ensure that the keystone documents are integrated and are effective in guiding the work of ports and ensuring that transparency that I talked about earlier. So for example, when we look at the different documents that we are charged with, either required to have or best management practices, we're required to have a comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements. That's a document that talks about what it is that the port is doing. The strategic plan, as we talked about, is not required, but it's a best practices document that helps establish why it is the port is doing what they're doing. And then there are a wide variety of tools and documents that end up describing the how do we get things done. There's the budget, there's the delegation of authority, there is promotional hosting, a whole series of different keystone documents that make up the integrated environment that port districts operate within. So some of those documents that are required by law, these are actually in the statute and you are required to have them. The majority of these documents, the annual operating and capital budgets, a tax levy if you use it, the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements, those are all required annually, and they are required to have a formal public hearing when you adopt those to give people an opportunity to look, to give you input on those. You also are required to have promotional hosting policies. So these three of these basically are very much related in terms of the requirement for an annual update, and they also share the requirement of a public hearing. So in the integrated planning model that we advocate, there's a process where we're suggesting that all of the public hearings for all of these different documents happen in succession on the same day to help provide a nice overall picture of and complete picture of what it is that the port is intending to do with respect to those, which are primarily financially related. The other documents listed on the right-hand side are best practices, and ports, we're going to go over a couple of different slides here that show how other ports are maybe using these documents, but the intent is really to ensure that transparency and make it clear how and why the port is doing what it's doing. And again, creating alignment, not only between the commission and staff, but as importantly, to create alignment between the port and the community and people that it serves.
Lisa, can I add something here?
Sure.
You know, it's interesting, commissioners, because we always get pushback of why we have to do a comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements. And a lot of ports don't even have harbors because we have a budget. But if you look at the history of ports in Washington, you know, 110, 15, 20 years ago, I guess maybe 125 years ago, there was a movement across the United States to put port authorities into public hands, port docks and piers, because there was a feeling in the country that corporations, mainly the railroads and shipping companies, controlled the movement of freight, and the waterfronts were becoming infestations of bad economics and no access. So this whole rise to public port authorities came up, and it was really pushed by the populist movement in the late 1800s. And then, as you know, adopted in 1911 in Washington. But at the same time, people sort of freaked out and said, well, we can't give these port commissioners all this power. So we're going to require that they have a hearing every year or occasionally, and they adopt a comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements so that we can comment on what they're planning on doing so they don't get out of control. That's where it comes from. And the WPPA has tried to change the name of it, particularly the word scheme, because it doesn't just sound like a very good thing. But there's a reluctance to do it in the legislature because they're afraid if they open up that can of worms, so to speak, that all kinds of additional requirements will be put onto port authorities. And so that has always said, just leave well enough alone. But it's kind of an interesting, it's part of the history of ports why we have that.
Thanks, Jim.
I see Bill's, are Lisa and Jim, are you wanting to take questions as you go along?
Or do you want to wait till the end? I can wait till the end.
You can wait till the end? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if you do have questions, why don't you just write them down and then we'll come back to them and let you guys.
Yeah,
go on with
absolutely.
the
Absolutely. Thanks, Holly. That's great. Great thing to think about. So we just, in terms of the survey that we did, we wanted to, this was with regard to the budget and the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements, particularly, and some of these key required statutory documents. In our surveys, we found, and this was confirmed and consistent from the one in 2006 to the one in 2020 or 2020, that 25% of port districts don't believe that their budget reflects how they actually operate, which is kind of amazing to me. 90% don't believe the community understands what they do. So that's a very common theme. Again, people hear ports and they think of deep water facilities or airports. And in large part, there's a wide variety of things that port districts are doing, as we just covered. A third of them feel their comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements is out of date, and 50% of them don't have a current delegation of powers. So the keystone documents that we feel are most often used by port districts are those that are on this slide. It's interesting that there are some required documents required by statute that some port districts don't have. So it's really important to have an understanding about what it is that is required of you as a port district in terms of your documents, and make sure that you have those documents in place and a solid process for ensuring that going forward. Some of the less utilized Keystone documents, a facilities master plan, communications and marketing plans. One of the things that, again, Jim and I are pretty strong in our recommendations around would be a multi-year financial projection. That allows you to really take a look at your operations and your goals and priorities, as well as your resources, both staff and financial, and understand each year as you make decision, what does that do to your financial picture in the next few years to come? So we feel that's an important document and tool to use as a port district. And to the degree that it's important in your community to have a clear policy and statement about how it is you are using tax receipts if you collect them, that is a very useful tool in establishing and maintaining that transparency in your public service function. So we feel like that's an important component. It can often be a part of your financial policies, and it can be very simple. It can be a single statement of, we're going to use our taxes for capital improvements. Or it could be more complex and more detailed, depending on how it is you as an organization can best utilize those types of documents and policies. So Jim's going to talk a little bit more about accounting and finance moving forward here.
Just a couple of concepts here, and then in a couple of slides, we're going to get into the tools that we think are useful for you. Just a reminder about the difference between accounting and finance. And I know a lot of people know this, but it's a good reminder. Accounting describes where we've been. It's a looking out the back window of the car down the road. It's a data recording process, and it comes from the term accounting for the past. Finance talks about where we're going, and it comes from the French word to settle a debt going forward, to make sure your finances are in good shape. So we had that slide before about what kind of a strategic thinker you are. Finance people tend to be looking forward all the time, and it's less defined, but that maps where you're going, and accounting functions tend to be, which are very valuable, don't get me wrong, this is where we've been. So I just wanted to raise that as you look at these tools. And Lisa, I got a couple of slides here on taxes. If you look at that bar in the middle, it says the tax philosophy spectrum. And these are just a couple of quotes by somebody who likes taxes and somebody who doesn't like taxes. But on that spectrum at the top, on the far right, the words on the top define how different ports design their tax use policy. Some ports, particularly smaller ports, use their property taxes for both operations and capital use. They run on them. Then if you move to the left, some ports only use their taxes for capital projects. Moving further to the left, some ports only use their taxes for truly public benefit things like parks, environmental work, economic development. And then on the far left, some ports, mainly one port in the state, doesn't collect property taxes, and that's the Port of Kalama. They have such a great shipping business. So I only bring this up for you commissioners to think as you're going through this process of what your philosophy is, where you want to be. I have strong feelings about the tax rolls are very tight, particularly for other agencies like school districts that don't have the revenue raising capacity that port authorities do. As you consider, when you look at rates of returns and things like that, you need to determine if you're including property taxes in, which is like a grant. It's really not very, it's not a true business model if you're using property taxes. The other side of the spectrum is a lot of people will argue, our big cargo ports argue, yeah, well, we need to have property taxes to build stuff so we can move cargo because there's more jobs. Recently had just a quick little anecdotal story. I did some work 5 years ago with a port who'll go nameless, who was advertising the community. They were making $7 or $8 million in profits. And the mayor of the local town said, if they're making so much money, why are they collecting $10 million in property taxes? And the port's answer was because we hire a lot of longshoremen. Well, they hire 100 longshoremen, and they could give each longshoreman a $100,000 salary and close the port down. That'd be a lot easier than collecting the taxes and doing it. So it's kind of an interesting public management philosophy as you look at governing and managing the port, how you use property taxes. So Lisa and I both think it's really smart to have a tax policy.
Yeah, and Jim, if I can just add, I think, you know, the idea is for you, if you're going to have a tax policy, to think of the spectrum. Not that one spectrum is right or wrong. Really, the spectrum is about what works for individual communities. I came from a small port that didn't have, not only did we not have revenue generating facilities, we struggled in terms of having an economic and development environment where people would want to, businesses would want to create a revenue generating environment. So it's really an individual discussion by port district, but I guess we're advocating that you at least think about having the conversation and then documenting the outcome of that conversation.
So this is just a slide to let you know how the other ports are using their property taxes. And they don't add up to 100 here. So half of them use it for operating costs. Most ports use it for capital projects and equipment. And that includes debt service payments in there. And then the 4% on do not levy property tax is a little bit of a misnomer because it's only one port, and this was of the ports responding. So the bulk of the ports, I will tell you, use taxes for capital or capital debt payments. That's where most ports are using taxes these days.
So the next part of our conversation is we're going to focus in on the contents of our port pool tool shed, where we have two different sides of this potential of this tool shed. One looks at tools that are set up for the ports to use through state laws and programs. We're going to not spend as much time on that one because that's those are pretty clear and available in terms of understanding what you can do with those tools. But the other one is really looking at tools that help facilitate that solid internal alignment between governance and management, between commission and staff. So just briefly describing some of the tools that are specifically authorized for ports by Washington state law. So some of the most used include industrial development districts, which is a tool by which the port district can say, this industrial property is sitting in disarray and it's marginal, and marginal is defined by the law. And we want to be able to take and move it back into some sort of a productive economic community benefit type of a use. Along with that is what's called the industrial development district tax. You have the ability, once you've established an industrial development district in your community, to essentially levy an additional tax for a limited period of time. Public development corporations are a way in which a private industry use a specific type of use, manufacturing, industrial and transportation use as it's defined by federal tax law. It allows that private activity to be financed through public bonds that generate, that don't have that tax, that do have the tax exempt status. Sorry, my apologies. If that's confusing, go ahead and ask me a question when we get done. And then the Port of Olympia is familiar for sure with foreign trade zones. You have the South Puget Sound Foreign Trade Zone, number 216, and you understand, I would imagine, how those opportunities work. Less utilized tools that are available in statute, local improvement districts. It's not just cities and counties that can implement local improvement districts. Port districts are also allowed. And there are some tools that are just not utilized right now. I'm not sure exactly why. Jim may have some thoughts on why those tools are not currently used, but they are there in the toolbox. If there's ever an opportunity, for example, a community renewal agency, maybe there's a specific opportunity working with the city or the county that you might find an opportunity that might be helpful to. implement. So in terms of, we're going to shift our focus now, and this is really going to be what the rest of our time with you is going to center on, are these tools that we've found to be very useful, both in our respective roles as EDs of port districts. So we've both used one or more of these tools, but we've also helped other ports in our role as consultant and strategic advisor in terms of looking at these different tools. One of the most important components of these tools, at least 3 of them that we're going to talk about, is that they are policy level discussions, but the outcomes can be graphically represented, and that allows these complex policy issues to be more readily understood and conveyed in terms of alignment. So the 3 tools that have that visual component are balancing mission and margin, looking at your operational capacity, and then assessing some different trends. So mission versus margin. This is a tool that was particularly helpful and meaningful for the 3 commissioners that I worked for at the Port of Douglas County. They love talking about mission versus margin. So oftentimes what ports do, while there is some characteristic of private enterprise, fundamentally, we are a municipal government, and we are in business to exist to help our communities as authorized by the enabling legislation. So ports are entrusted with fiscal responsibility of spending public dollars to benefit the entirety of the district in different ways that are important. And there is a component of mission involved in the work where the mission is rather embodies the benefit that's received by the community from what the port is doing, either an investment or some operational component. And then margin is more of that private enterprise component to the larger picture. So what is the return on investment of the different activities that you might be working through in your work? So Jim, you want to talk a little bit about the operational capacity?
Yeah, and when we come back after the break, we want to give you some case studies of how ports have used these. They're pretty simple, but they're very, very effective. So this one's a little bit like mission versus margin, but on the left axis, you go from low to high on operational capacity, with staffing, however you define that, and on the horizontal axis from left to right, you go from little community need rather than benefit to great community need. So, if you've got something where you've got little community need out there and you've got lots of capacity, just stay the course. On the other hand, if you've got great community need and you've got great capacity as well, then you have capacity for change and implementing something new. If you are in that lower left box where you have hardly any capacity and there's not much need or demand, just focus on day-to-day operations. And likewise, if you have no operational capacity, but there still is great need, you need to know that so that you don't undertake new challenges, which could fail very easily because you don't have the capacity, or you build the capacity. So it's a great way to do that. And this is an interesting one. We had a port, this is quite 5 or 6 years ago, call us up and say, hey, can you help us think about the future 20 years from now, where we should be? And we said, sure. So this was assessing trends. And I've given you some examples there, like climate change, now the pandemic, interest rates, higher demand for air travel. And you're looking forward in the future. And the question is this trend, and we're going to show you an example after the break, is this trend relevant to our port? Yes, it is. Is it likely to materialize? Yes, it is. If it did, would it have a significant impact on us? Yes. Then what are we going to do about it? We're going to ignore it. That's a good option. We're going to continue just to watch it, monitor it. We're going to plan and analyze it, or we're going to do something about it now and accommodate it now. And so this was something we used at a port. We actually did 45 trends in the future and went through a full day retreat of the commission determining whether or not those issues were relevant, likely to materialize, and would have an impact on the port, and what they wanted to do about them. And when we come back after the break, we'll give you a couple examples of that. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, so if you are, this is the last thing we're going to talk about before the break, and then we can hopefully we'll have time for questions here. But so if you imagine it's early spring, a couple months from now, perhaps that the port's chugging along, you're implementing your priorities that you've established in your annual work plan and your budget, and all of the sudden, and a really intriguing opportunity that you hadn't anticipated comes up. What is it that you are going to do about that? So part of what we like to help port districts deal with is taking those unanticipated opportunities and figuring out what to do with them, how to handle them. So we've got a process where you ask yourself a series of questions and understand what it is. You establish this process, you help create transparency around those unanticipated consequences or unanticipated opportunities, sorry. You ensure equity in how you're dealing with those different opportunities from one opportunity to the next. It really helps you to stay focused on what it is your priorities are, and then it helps you understand the impacts of shifting that focus. If you shift course and go after this unanticipated opportunity, what does that do to what you have already planned? Are there delays that are caused? Are there impacts to those, your work plan and your resources? So it's really a helpful tool. And again, it's basically just a series of questions that you can answer yes and no to. Again, as Jim mentioned, we're going to provide you some examples after the break of all these different tools. So they'll hopefully be a little bit more clear.
Excellent.
So that's the last slide that we have. So I think we do have a little bit of time, a few minutes to ask and answer any questions.
Yep. Can you take the screen, your screen down? There we go. Okay, we have about 7 minutes. So yeah, Commissioner Zita.
Well, I want to thank Mal Foster-Alonji for this presentation. You have given useful presentations along these lines to the WPPA, and I think that we could benefit from closer work with you that is tailored for the Port of Olympia. And I would like to encourage my fellow commissioners to consider doing that. I have a couple of questions, but I think Commissioner McGregor does too.
Okay, we can take turns. Commissioner McGregor.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just had two things. One is more of a comment. Jim alluded to it early on the comp plan versus scheme, that the legislature has concerns about changing the language to match up with what cities do. And the port experienced that many years ago back in Jim, I think was at the Port of Bellingham, maybe when this happened. But we did what we called a comp plan, the commissioners did. And the citizens began to think that this was similar to a city's plan, and it requires a whole lot of different variations and steps to go through than what a port comp plan does. But because the language was interchangeable at that point, it created a real divergent opinion by people who thought we should be doing it this way instead of that way. And so we eventually went back to comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements. And at that point, I was always told city's plan, port scheme. So I'll leave that at that. The other item I wanted to ask about was, and I think I heard you right, you said that the comprehensive scheme or the CSHI should be done annually, or should we only need to do that when we have a significant or substantive change to the plan, to the scheme, excuse me?
Yeah, so the requirement is actually that anytime you are going to spend money on a capital asset, that you're supposed to hold a public hearing and have a public hearing and include that item in your comp scheme. So from a practical standpoint, if you are regularly adjusting your capital budget on an annual basis, you are likely expending resources on your capital assets, and so therefore need to have that review in the comp scheme. And the reason we set up the process, the overall process, the integrated process that we have, it allows you to establish your plan of capital improvements in your comp scheme. and it allows you to adopt your tax levy and then adopt your budget, which includes your capital improvement plan. You can do all of those things at a single time so that there's not, so that there's clarity around what it is you're planning to spend money on. So theoretically, you wouldn't have to do it annually if you're, making, a plan and you've got a 5-year capital improvement plan. But if you make changes from year to year in your annual capital budgeting process, then that's when it would trigger a requirement to amend that comp scheme.
Thank you.
Commissioner, I was going to tell you that a lot of ports we run into have what I call the box of resolution comprehensive scheme. And if somebody's got a cardboard box with a bunch of commission resolutions amending the comp scheme, and that's their comp scheme. And we're just saying the hearing requirements, the notice requirements are all the same. Get in the habit of doing it once a year. If you need to do it mid-year, you got to change one and update it, but just get in the habit of doing it.
Right. Typically in my time, not only as a port staff, but also on the commission, we've updated that comprehensive scheme. If there's been a change that is being reflected in the capital budget moving forward. If it hasn't been, we haven't been doing that annually because it's already in there at some point. So that's, I just wanted clarification. We don't have to do it annually as long as it's not a variance from what's already in the established comprehensive schemes. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question for Jim and Lisa. We're right about to take our break. When we come back, do you want to continue with your presentation or do you want to pick up any remaining questions? Because Commissioner Zita, you had a couple more questions, right? And Commissioner Downing, did you have any questions? No, okay. And Commissioner McGregor, did you have a couple more as well?
I have, but I can hold off on them. I'd rather keep moving forward and kind of stick to the timeline, but let Commissioner Zita have her time to ask a couple questions too. So.
Yeah, so Holly, my thought is we can, I would invite Commissioner Zita to ask the questions. It could be that part of the next step is going to answer some of those questions as we go through the case studies and the examples of these tools. So maybe a little bit of both.
And Holly, we've left a lot more time in the second half than the first half for discussion. So we could start off with those if we wanted to.
Let's do that then. So let's go ahead and stay on schedule with our break. And then we'll start up with questions and you just let us know if they're going to be answered in your presentation, just so you can tell folks, wait for it, it's coming. And we'll do that. Okay, everybody. So we'll take a 15-minute break and reconvene at 2 o'clock. So yeah, get some fresh air if you can, and we'll see you back here then. All right, here we go.
Lisa, it looks like you're in a dance studio. I keep expecting you to break out in some like, bar exercises.
Yeah, no. No, no ballet for me.
Well, I sure have been enjoying your presentation. So Jim and Lisa, thank you so much so far. It's really been interesting and well put together. So as soon as everybody's back, we'll go ahead and start with questions like I mentioned earlier. And then we can just, keep flowing. I think we've got, let me look at our agenda here. Yeah, we have from now till 2:45. So we have another 45 minutes with you. And then I think then we'll all say goodbye and give you a round of applause or something. Okay, yay. So Commissioner Zita, are you back? Because I think you're first up with questions. We'll wait just a minute then.
Sure.
I see, what is that? Attendees. I don't know what that means.
It looks like Rudy is raising his hand.
His hand, that's what's
I'm
going on.
gonna allow him to talk really quick. I don't know if he has
Yeah,
a question.
Please do.
Hey, Rudy, you should be able to speak if you unmute.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe have an understanding of the ground rules. If knuckleheads from the peanut gallery have questions, are we allowed to ask those, or when would that provision come into play?
No questions from Rudy. Just kidding.
Yeah, why don't you, Rudy, why don't you at this point hold your questions and let's just make sure we get all the commissioners' questions answered, and then we'll see if we have time at the end. How about that?
Okie dokie.
Okay, great. So Commissioner Zita, we're going to start back up with giving you an opportunity to ask your questions next.
Great, thank you. Would it be too difficult to return to the balancing mission and margin slide?
It would not be difficult. It'll just take me a few minutes.
Okay, so this balancing mission and margin slide is something that we have seen from groups like Mal Foster Alonji in one form or another at virtually every WPPA meeting. And it's impressed me every year as a useful tool for strategizing at the commission level. Basically, there's a trade-off, or there tends to be a trade-off between making money and helping the community. And I remember the example that was given 5 or 6 years ago at my first commission meeting at the WPPA. The great community benefit in the lower right corner, the yellow square, could be for example, parks or walking trails, which is something that we heard the community values a lot in Vision 2050. And then on the upper left square, blue, that for us, for example, might have been the Lacey CBC purchase if it had worked out to be a big moneymaker, which it didn't really. So strategic tools like this can be really useful to us as we are setting our goals and making decisions. And I think this is a great example of where Mal Foster Alonji could help our commission in our planning. Another example, of course, is the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements. I appreciate the recommendations that have been made here and at WPPA meetings, that document be visited every year about the time of the budget. We have not revisited our CSHI formally in quite a few years, and we could use some help doing that.
Great.
That's it for now.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. We are definitely going to talk about how this applies on the ground, talk about some more examples too. So perfect.
And then Commissioner McGregor, it sounds like Zita, that was all from you. Commissioner McGregor, did you have any others that you wanted to pop in before we get started?
I just wanted to ask, they mentioned multi-year
Mhm.
projections. Are we talking just 2 years out, 5 years out? How far out are we trying to project the uncertainty of our world?
So from a multi-year financial projection, when I was at the Port of Douglas, I had this monstrous spreadsheet, which I don't like spreadsheets, but I did it. And I was looking at 10-year projections. So because we had debt that was out beyond 10 years, right? So we had a debt service schedule that showed the full obligation annually out to completion and satisfaction of that debt. And then that helped us kind of plug in what we understood on an annual basis. And you know, a projection is just that. It's just a projection. It's just a tool. We were clear about what our assumptions were for the different expectations and why we chose, for example, a 3% increase on salaries. You know, we established what the assumption was, and then documented it. And then, you know, it becomes an annual exercise because each year as you're making financial decisions, you have impact into those future years. And that was really a helpful tool. My 3 commissioners before I got there had not gotten a lot of information initially in their budgeting process. They were just given the budget without seeing the whys and the wherefores. And so they really appreciated not only seeing, I made them sit through the spreadsheet, line by line spreadsheet, which they didn't necessarily appreciate. They didn't enjoy, but they appreciated. But they also saw the projection behind it. So if we choose to do this year, that means next year we're not going to be able to do this because we don't have the capital or the resources to go forward, or we're going to have to issue more debt. And if we do that, we have this impact. So it's really a helpful tool. And like I said, each year is more and more solid, right? So the farther out you are in your projection, the less, you know, solid that is as a projection, but at least in that 2 to 3 to 5 year period of time, it's a reasonable projection of reality, I would think. Commissioner Zita?
Thanks, Commissioner McGregor, for bringing that up. That was on my mind too. And Lisa, your way of doing those projections sounds very useful. We used to do that. We used to see that every year when we had a chief financial officer. We have not had a chief financial officer for a few years, and it is very useful for planning to see a 5 to 10 year at least projection of debt, income, and the financial measures that we have adopted. So all of that would be really, it's something that we're due for.
And I might, Commissioner, I might add to that the typical debt metric or the typical metrics on your performance financially are going to be your debt coverage ratio. How much free cash do you have to pay your set debt payments, your mortgage, essentially? You know, and by bonding standards, you want to be typically 1.3 maybe is what a lot of bond underwriters want. Bellingham, we had a 2.0 coverage ratio. I think the Port of Seattle has a 2.25 coverage ratio. But those are judgmental. And then how much debt capacity did you have if you wanted to issue debt? And then the last measurement I always liked was how much cash is in the bank at the end of the year. So if you got those 3 things, it's a good measure of your financial horsepower. And it's just one of the ingredients that go into a strategic decision about a project or an investment or something. So, and I'm going to concur with Lisa that 10 years is where you ought to be.
That kind of analysis would be very useful. We got warnings from the state auditor last year that we were not meeting some of their key financial benchmarks. So that would be very useful.
Yep. So, Holly, you're on mute. There you
I
go.
just got it. Yeah. Anything else before we jump back into the presentation? Okay, great. Take it away.
All right, so we're going to go through these slides a little bit quicker. It's a little bit more free flowing and a lot less of us talking at you. We would really like this to be very interactive. So I would say go ahead and interrupt us as we're going through here and Jim and I'll try to remember to ask questions of you as well. So we want this to be really helpful to you in understanding these tools. But so again, this is how we're going to find some alignment in terms of the Port District between management and governance, between, you know, mission versus margin, all sorts of things where you have a lot to balance as a port commission and a public entity. So the three, we're gonna actually cover four, but these are the three that are most helpful, I think. So we're going to go through the mission versus margin concept a little bit more in depth. We're going to talk even more so about the operational capacity and assessing trends. We also have a list of questions for the unanticipated opportunities. And we can certainly cover any other questions that you might have at the end of the presentation. So just to kind of reiterate then, we're going to refresh each of these three tools and then show you examples and/or case studies. So on the mission versus margin, again, thinking a little bit more specifically about how this lays out and how the balancing act works. So on the left axis is the margin. So this is where you're looking at potential financial return on investment. This can be modified, you know, if you want to take a look at other types of return, quote unquote, you can do that. But generally speaking, this is how you measure that financial component with that public benefit component. So on the bottom of this axis in the far left corner, the initiative is not a moneymaker. In fact, it may be a money loser. And at the top of that left-hand side is a full return. You're making money, net profit on whatever it is that you're doing on that particular spectrum. And then on the lower axis, on the bottom axis, that's the measure of community benefit. So on the left-hand side, there's really no community benefit. There are things that port districts do that don't necessarily have that specific community benefit. On the right-hand side, the initiative that you're evaluating has a significant community benefit. It's something that's really important to the community. So the idea is to understand and discuss each of those different assets and initiatives and plot them on this graph wherever they fit. And then using that graphing process to understand, should we go for this project? Should we maybe not? Do we have the capacity to go for it? Lots of different things. So I'm going to review just a quick example, and then Jim is going to give you a specific case study of how this has been applied. So for example, what happened, Jim, to my, oh, see, Jim created some animation in my slide for me.
And I didn't tell her.
And he didn't tell me, so surprise, surprise. So certain examples of different types of things that fall in these different quadrants. So a distribution warehouse, it has some community benefit, right? There's some measure of value in having that distribution warehouse somewhere in your community to serve the different retail outlets that are accessing it. But it's really more, it's on the margin end of things. It's going to make you money. It's going to provide you with resources to help you provide for the other community benefits. So if you're going to provide community benefits, you have to have resources to do that with, both staff and revenue. And so having certain facilities in your holdings that are this resource creator, that's really where those fit in the grand scheme of things. In terms of, again, little necessarily a lesser amount of benefit, but something that loses money. And if any of you are pilots, I apologize in advance, but the reality is that general aviation and recreational airports do not make money. And other than the benefits that they generally bring to the people that are using it, there's not a huge amount of community benefit. So the idea behind this process is it's okay if you decide that you want to fund your GA airport. And we did that at the Port of Douglas. The Waterville and Mansfield airports were huge sucks on the resources of the Port of Douglas. but they were important community facilities in those small towns. So we made a conscious decision, the commission made a conscious decision to fund those things, but they understood that going into it. So generally you can, it isn't to say that you shouldn't do things that are in this lower left quadrant, but make sure that if you are, you understand going into that it's going to lose money. It's maybe applicable and beneficial to maybe not a huge amount of the community, but a certain component of your community, and just be intentional in terms of how you decide to do that. And then in terms of the huge community benefit with a huge return on investment, Jim's example here that he added in for us up in the upper right is SeaTac Airport. It's a statewide, national, international facility. There is a ton of revenue that comes into the community, both from an indirect standpoint as well as directly. And the Port of Seattle is hugely benefited by virtue of having that particular facility in their ledger. And then lastly, you know, parks, right? So this is a parks, trails, those types of community public assets that are super important to your constituents. They're important for the quality of life in the community, which have, you know, that component of a community has indirect benefit in terms of finances and economics in your community. But again, understand that those things do not generate revenue. So at some point in time, if you're going to provide huge benefits to the community, you have to be able to pay for those benefits. And so this tool allows you to not only plot your assets on this, but it also you can use it in two ways. You could say, here's where our assets are. And we're going to show you arrows where we want to move. Here's where we want them to be, right? So Jim, I'm going to, with that, pass it over to you to talk a little bit about that. So this is a specific case study.
So this is, and I can say this, Commissioner, go ahead.
You said you wanted this interactive. Is this okay for a comment?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm a little concerned about the example of a distribution warehouse as a resource creator. Distribution warehouses tend to have low employment, 1 or 2 people per acre at relatively low wages. They tend not to be union jobs, and they tend to be exempt from lots of taxes. Construction is exempt from sales tax. They're also exempt from building occupancy and use taxes. So I'm not sure that's the greatest example of a resource creator.
Yeah.
Some of the other examples are better.
So I think the reason that that's there, Commissioner Zita, is that from the standpoint of a real estate asset that is paying a fee or a lease payment to the Port District, they often can be very lucrative. So it's lucrative in terms of the financial component that it brings to the Port District directly from a financial standpoint. Jim, did you want to?
Well, I was just going to say too, Commissioner, too, if that's why it's farther to the left on the public benefit, because you're right, it doesn't have all that spin-off benefit in the employment. But this was just kind of selfishly looking at, is it a resource creator for the port itself, not the community? Now, maybe it should be farther to the left, you know, on the mission scale, because it doesn't meet community benefit as much.
Yeah, I remember when the city of Tumwater found out that some of the businesses that they had installed in some of their big buildings along their main drag, Tumwater Boulevard, were exempt from taxes. They were really disappointed because they thought they were going to be big money makers for the city, and they turned out not to be. Now, what turned out to be a big money maker was the marijuana facility in Tumwater, because they have huge utility bills and the city gets to tax the utility bills. Distribution centers and warehouses, their utility bills are exempt from taxes. Mm-hmm. So that's also, you know, they just don't bring in as much.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing out, Commissioner Zita, is a great example of how the perspective that you have when you're going through this exercise needs to be, y'all need to be on the same page. What is our perspective here? What is the question that we're answering or asking and trying to answer? Because you're right, distribution warehouse for all those reasons that you mentioned. And again, but But if the perspective of this analysis process is the port's finances or the port's actions, and again, you're wanting to provide lots of opportunity for community benefits, how are you going to pay for those community benefits? So it's a well structured tool to be able to use from a multiple of those perspectives. So that's great.
Yeah,
Jim?
thank you.
Yeah, so this next one is, the case study is actually, it's Bellingham, and I know it well, so I wanted to include it. And this is where Bellingham was in the early to mid 90s and where it wanted to go. So the goals the commission set where they wanted all the lines of business to break even, and they only wanted to use, eventually only wanted to use property taxes for community benefit projects. So that was the overall mission. So if you can see on this chart here, and we didn't animate it, but starting on the upper right, the 4 green arrows, yeah, there you go. So Bellingham, BLI is Bellingham International Airport, you know, pretty good service to the community. Keep in mind, this is back in the 90s. And where the commission wanted it to be was to be making money and breaking even. And so that took about 10 years actually to move the airport up there, but that was the strategic goal. If you move to the left at marinas, the marinas had pretty good public benefit, not as much as the airport because only 4% of the population had a boat in the water. That the marinas were being subsidized by property taxes because they weren't breaking even. And the goal was to get them just at the break-even mark, not make money on the boaters, but get them even. Further to the left, the marine terminals, which in Bellingham is the cargo docks and the Alaska Ferry Terminal, they were losing money, mainly the ferry terminal, because the contract with the state of Alaska wasn't great. And so that took quite a while to get that one moved up into the blue area, or the black, essentially, having it break even. If you move up to the top there, the real estate portfolio always made money. And this is the combined, at that time, 280 leases that the port had. They combined the portfolio was making money, but the commission wanted it to be a resource creator and really get the rates up to market and drive resources. Then if you look down at their second goal, then if they got all the lines of business to break even, the second goal was to use taxes just for public purpose. And in the lower right corner, you'll see their property taxes that were used for open space, parks, that type of thing. Programmatic economic development, like funding EDC, chambers. The port's long gone on now. They're the ADO for Whatcom County. And then and eventually environmental remediation for Bellingham Bay came into play with the port's taxes. So those were the 3 public benefit things, community benefit purposes that use property taxes. Now I will tell you that since then Bellingham has, it's not totally as pure as this now. I think in the marinas, they're underwriting some of the commercial fishing fleet mortgage rates with property taxes. But this is just a good example. And I'll tell you another port that has used this model very, very successfully is the Port of Pasco. Under Randy Hayden's leadership there in their commission, they figured out, they got it down to the building, building 75, is below water and we want to get it up in 3 years or whatever, it's realistic. But they've used this very successfully for the staff and the commission to communicate about where they want to be with their various assets. So it is, and Commissioner Zita too, I hope we haven't sounded like a broken record over the years, but it's such a great model, I think that, but the one thing I want to caution you on as you use it is, don't try to quantify the mission. That's a gut check. I work with a public utility district and they're very, they're rear window people looking back at the data. They want to know how we measure mission. They wanted some numeric scale, and it's, that's an instinctual thing about where benefit should be. The margin is very easy to measure, but mission's a little tougher. So, So any questions on that one for Bellingham?
Yeah, Commissioner Zita.
I think that's a great example, and I would love to see this applied to the Port of Olympia. We might have a tool that would help us not quantify, but get a handle on how far along we are on the mission line with our Vision 2050 work that we did.
Oh, that's true.
We can see how we're doing on those. And of course, it's easy to see if you're moving up on the margin. And a goal is also to move to the right toward mission.
Oh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Commissioner McGregor or Commissioner Downing, do either of you have any questions at this point before we move on?
Okay. Let's go on to the next one.
Well,
then.
I just want to,
Okay. Go
I'm kind of quiet, unusually quiet today, but I think this is a great model. Jim and Lisa, this is a great model. So, you know, I echo a little bit of what Commissioner Zeta says, you know, the mission and the margin and how you look at, you know, each and every either business segment or property or, you know, the port overall. I mean, I think it's very useful. I hope we can, you know, use this more.
Now it's, you know, it talks about policy in a picture, which I think is, for me, it's great. I have to see it. So, so the second one is about your capacity to do things. And we've talked about what it is. And on the left-hand side axis is the operational capacity high at the top. And on the bottom axis is sort of the community need, the mission need in the community, and whether or not you should be pursuing new things. And let's go to the second one, and we have a case study. There, the next slide.
So Jim, just before you go on, when we're talking about operational capacity, if you want to just clarify, we're talking about essentially staff capacity. Is that how you would characterize it?
I would say mainly staff capacity. I think in terms of volume. I also think in terms of talent. You know, if the Port of Olympia said we're going to go in the rocket ship business, you better have some rocket ship engineers on board to do that. So it's both in terms of talent, as we're in volume, and it's also the financial capacity to do it. And that's why those metrics and having that long-term picture and knowing what your financial horsepower is speaks volumes to your capacity to do new stuff. So, and it's kind of a funny model we have in the public sector. I mean, everything's like this, I mean, private companies too, but if you think about it, this commission may go out and bind all the port's tax capacity for the next 20 years. And then you all may leave office and the new commission comes in and they got great ideas, but the previous commission has used their tax. I mean, that's the way it works, but so having those metrics, I think, is important. So I think we're animated here. Hit this one, would you make sure? Yeah. So this was a case study of a public utility district, and public utility districts are very close to port authorities in Washington. On the one hand, they make money, they earn revenue. On the other hand, they have taxing capacity, just like ports do, in fact, virtually the same. And so this was a case of a public utility district in the state that were wrestling with two big issues. One was getting into broadband and extending dark fiber out into their county, and they were a county-wide utility district. And they made the conclusion that at that time there was great need for broadband to extend to their rural community, but they accepted the fact that they did not have enough capacity and staff talent and resources to go pursue that, because there was so much physical construction involved. And so in that case, they opted to pass on going into the broadband business. The second one was water rights. And this was a utility district that was heavily involved in water distribution for industrial and some residential, rural residential. And the local tribe too is very concerned about water rights and protecting streams for fish habitat. And so the utility commission decided, you know, we can accommodate this. We have enough talent and capacity, because we're in the water business already, to get into water rights and work with our local community to kind of solve some of these issues about who's got water rights down the road. So they did undertake that one because they felt like they had capacity for change. So I thought it was a great example where the commission was just pretty crystal clear where they wanted to go.
Is there more on this slide?
No,
There is not. Jim,
Okay,
do you have
let's-
anything else to wrap up this one?
no, go ahead.
Okay,
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, so the next one is on this one was really fun to do this project, I have to tell you. Because we ended up, this was a Puget Sound port. They were coming into a period where they were starting to pay off a lot of debt. They, for the last 10 years, had a big capacity for building stuff. They had engineers, construction managers on board, and all those projects were coming to a conclusion, as were the debt payments on them. So they were coming into an era of lots of capacity financial, and they want to know, where do we go in the future? So let me give you 2 examples of what they did and flip to the next one. So one of the 40 ones they looked at was small boat ownership. And this is probably 4 years ago. And we brought in a bunch of experts who helped us identify the trend in recreational boats, sailboats, motorboats that have to be in the water, right? Non-towable. And the trend we picked up from the industry, and we had people in from California all over to talk about it, is that the demand for boat ownership is down. Now that may have changed now in the pandemic, I'm not sure, but 4 or 5 years ago it was the case. And the surveys we did said that a lot of prospective boaters wanted a stationary boat. They wanted a cabin. They had no interest in going out and on the ocean. They wanted to park at the dock and barbecue and spend the night on the boat like it was a cabin up in the Cascades. So that was the trend. So we said, is this trend or issue relevant to the port? And this port was a big marina operator, and the commission said, absolutely. Is it likely to materialize? Yep, they thought it would materialize. And if it did, would it have a significant impact on our mortgage capacity and our business model? And the answer was yes. So they elected, with one more push of the button, Lisa, they elected to accept and accommodate this change in demographics with boat ownership. And so what they were going to start to do was allow for boat sharing in the harbor. They were going to allow for stationary boats that weren't necessarily ocean going. They were going to work on that. And the other interesting one was they were going to create a hospitality service so that all the restaurants and service people around the marina would have on the dock delivery, like room service, because the new boater wanted to sit in the boat and order a burger and a couple of burgers and fries for the kids and a steak for the parents and spend the night on the boat. So that was kind of an interesting one. The second one they had was, I mentioned before that they had paid off a lot of debt, and they were wondering about capital funding, and particularly where interest rates were going at the time. And we brought in some financial folks that talked about interest rates were low at that time, but they're likely to increase. And the port debt was low. And so the question to them was, is the availability of capital at interest rates for a certain time a trend we ought to pursue? Is it relevant to us? And the answer was yes. Is it likely to happen? They thought so. And if it did happen, would it have a significant impact on their ability to undertake new projects? And the answer was yes. And so they opted to further analyze it and start planning for the future. I will tell you, out of the 40 trends that they looked at, I think about 4 of them ended up into the do something now bucket. I think about 5 or 6 ended up to let's just monitor it. They had probably 10 or 12. They said, we're just going to ignore it. And the balance went into the let's analyze it further and plan for the future. So it's kind of an interesting thing to look at, but this is getting way out there for a port to look, but it's kind of an interesting tool to look at trends. And we developed this, by the way. We work with a futurist out of Seattle to build this model that as a way to talk about the future in real terms today. So it's kind of an interesting project.
So any questions on the trends analysis before we move on?
Okay.
All right.
Well, I'm dying to hear Rudy's question, so I hope we don't forget about Rudy. over
Oh,
there.
yeah. Well, let's, this is the last slide that we have, and this is just one of those things. These are the questions that we talked about in terms of the unanticipated opportunities. And so this is something that a lot of port districts that we do strategic planning for include in their strategic plan. They just say, when we have unanticipated opportunities, we're going to go through this process of asking and answering these different questions. So, really getting at is the opportunity consistent with the port's mission and values? Is it aligned with community goals? Where does it fall on the spectrum in terms of this mission versus margin balance? Rate of return? What is really important here, I think, and this was something again that my commissioners found really helpful, is this the conversation about if you take on this opportunity, what happens to what you're already doing, right? What are the impacts to the port's operational capacity, whether that's financial or staff-wise, as we just talked about? What existing port programs or investments might be impacted by this particular opportunity? And not to say that the answers create a required decision point, but rather that it gives you an understanding of what happened, what the implications of your decisions are, and you make those decisions then intentionally in the context of and in light of that understanding. So that is the last of the specific slides that we have. So if you want to open it up for questions and conversation, and I know we want to not forget about Rudy.
We won't forget about Rudy. Great. So how about if we take the screen down for right now and then
Sure.
see if commissioners or Sam, if you have any questions for Lisa and Jim. Yeah, Zita?
Well, maybe one of the other commissioners wants to go first, but I do have one.
Thank you. Bill or Joe, do either of you have something you'd like to ask?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Zita.
I'd like to go to your last slide, please.
Mhm.
I think that's very useful. It's just a reminder to us that when it looks like, hey, this could be a cool thing to do, how important it is for us to do a cost benefit analysis. We are good at doing benefit analyses and saying, hey, this might be great for us for this, that, and the other reason. It's important not to overlook the cost analysis, cost and impacts. What's it going to cost now? What's it going to cost down the line? And what may the impacts be? And these questions that you're asking here can help us do a better job with that.
Great, thank you. Okay, Sam, did you have anything you wanted to ask? And then we'll open it up for others. And your mute's on. There you go.
No, I don't have any questions right now. I do have, in our next segment, we'll have opportunity to talk with Commission about things where I think where we're already doing some of these things, some of how I think we need to expand it, some opportunities for that. So really kind of next steps.
Terrific. Okay. So yeah, go ahead, Joe.
It's an interesting comment that one of the hard things at Port of Olympia is judging community impact in two ways. One is, we have to almost predict a given project is going to be of great interest to the community. And then if it is, do we have that interest? Then how do we measure that interest? And so we've had issues over the past few years that are of great interest. And then how do you judge, what's the majority of the feedback? Meaning, because a lot of people might not elect to show up at a Port Commission meeting and give their input. A lot of people give their input via email. And then when we do predict community interest, we have an organized process such as we do right now with this thing called Destination Waterfront. We have organized meetings and we invite the public in and we solicit and consolidate their feedback. So, there's a myriad of different things going on in that side of the equation when you talk about community impact. Do you have any tips for us as far as how to do it better? Because sometimes we hit it on the nose and sometimes we don't. And sometimes we're left, scratching our heads like, what should we really do? Because, we're hearing it from both sides.
Yeah, well, that is not unique to ports, right? So that is any publicly elected or appointed body is often faced with that. What you hear at your public meetings are often those who have some unmet need that they want you to know about. They want you to know that they have an issue with this topic that you're considering, and those who aren't attending are, maybe they don't know about it, or maybe they're happy. And so that issue of how do you balance the input? What I would say is having the transparency that is generated around these processes that we've talked about. So you have a clearly identified and articulated strategic plan that you can point to and say, this is a great opportunity. Maybe the port isn't the best leader in this case, because it's not quite, it doesn't quite fit in our goals, but we agree with you. And so let's look at other opportunities for somebody else to lead. So I'm advocating for, I'm empathizing with you because I understand your challenge. It's global when you talk about public service. But I'm also advocating for these tools because they really are intended to provide clear description of what you are, why you are doing what you're doing, how you intend to go about it, and creates that transparency and accountability to the larger community.
Yeah, this is such a big topic, and I think we could spend a whole session just on that. I want to, in the time we have left, I do want to make sure Rudy gets his chance, as we've all asked. So, Rudy, do you still have a question you'd like to get answered today?
I do, and
Go ahead.
and it wasn't complicated. It was back when we were talking about the comprehensive scheme, and I thought I heard a mixed message. But at the end of the year, in November every year, we do a series of resolutions: the operating capital budget, the tax levy, the rates and charges. Couldn't we simply do the one more resolution that is updating the comprehensive scheme and incorporates the capital plan by reference? And it's a very simple process that's procedural, and it's all part of the whole public hearing budget, package that happens.
Absolutely, that is the intent. And often, most years, that's probably going to be it. And if there are significant changes that happen in terms of maybe the port surpluses property, or maybe you have an opportunity to acquire property, then that annual process gives you a chance to make more substantial updates if you would like. But yes, absolutely, Rudy, that's definitely the methodology that we promote.
Okay, thank you.
A little twist on that, though, and at least, I think what you're saying is we just adopt a resolution that says, go look at the capital plan. That's our comp scheme. And you might want to consider whether or not, it doesn't take a lot of effort to have the standalone document. That might be the only difference.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody walked into my office and said, hey, let me see your comp scheme, I don't want to say, well, here's a resolution. Now go down the hall and get the budget and look at, I want to hand them something that says, here's our.
No, I just meant it to be, that would be the update, would be the new capital plan for the new year gets
Right.
incorporated into the document.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. And that's where my answer was too, Rudy, is that because the box of resolutions that Jim mentioned earlier is not what we're advocating, right?
Right.
So you do want to actually have a document that gets updated that says on the front of it comp scheme, and you're right, it has to be adopted by resolution as I believe the statute requires. And it could very simply be a matter of a repeat of your capital budget for that year, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, well, we're just wrapping up our time here together. So Lisa and Jim, it's just been such a pleasure having you. It's been so fun and interesting. And I think the discussion and the questions and comments were also just really insightful. So anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
No,
Or have you sign off? We're staying on, but I think
I
you're
want-
signing off.
I just want to say, these questions are complicated, they're hard. It's a complex environment that you're working in because you got one foot in the marketplace and one foot in the government square, so to speak. So I just encourage you, to the extent you can start to maybe use these tools or modify them to your best benefit. It's a good idea. And by the way, the folks that framed the Port Authority structure were pretty sharp, and they understood what the kind of tools you were going to need to go forward. And that was 100 years ago. So anyway, so it's kind of fun too.
Yeah. And I would just add, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today. It's been our pleasure. So,
Well, here's our applause. Thank you.
thank you.
Appreciate it so much.
I hope we'll get a chance to work more with you on applying these things directly to the Port of Olympia.
Thanks so
That'd be
much.
great. Thank you.
Okay, friends, we're going to take just like 1 minute. This is, everybody just stop for 1 minute. You can stand up if you want, and then we'll come back and have our next conversation. This is your 1 minute, like stop and just breathe.
One.
One.
Holly, I'm gonna go ahead and move Rudy into the panelist group too, since he's gonna be part of the next presentation. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Aspen.
Yes.
Not that I don't want to see Rudy's smiling face, but we're going to be talking about next steps with this type of strategic planning, keystone documents, etc. And Rudy will be more with the processes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Oh, okay.
My mistake.
I wasn't sure.
Sorry,
I didn't.
Rudy. I'm booting you back out if you're there.
Good. I wasn't sure either, so I was just assuming he was supposed to be here.
So Holly, we didn't plan a break in here.
Nope. That was just to give folks a little transition moment because we're moving right into the next section.
Okay.
So
Great.
I really was serious about the 1 minute.
1 minute. I'm back.
You're back. You're good. Bill, Zita, you all ready? That was a pretendo break. That was just a stretch and transition.
Mhm.
The cows are looking really good there.
Mhm.
They look happy. And I think we're on. So Sam, what are you thinking about here?
Right. So I wanted to take this conversation further with the commission and to let you know of some of what I've been doing on this kind of management side of the equation. And so I have already listed the services of MFA, Mont Foster Langy, to perform an assessment of our keystone, or I often refer to them as our foundational documents, as well as kind of where we are with both the statutory and best practices. And just I will tell you that I think that one, I have a lot of respect for MFA, and I also think that it is good to periodically bring in somebody that has fresh eyes. It's not part of your day-to-day organization, and to really take a look at how you're doing things. I think the Port of Olympia is in a good position because the staff here has really added a lot of rigor to like the policy framework that we operate in. So for example, we actually do have a tax levy policy, and that's part of what is adopted by the commission. There are a lot of ports that don't even have that. There are other things that I really do think that, I've seen since my tenure here that we still need some work on, and particularly it goes to that multi-year planning. And I think it's both in capital projects, but in the financial projections, and then how are you marrying everything up? So, if you, for example, the commission would like us to build a new administrative and marina office, do we have the financial capacity to do that? What are our projections to do that? How does that fit within our capital program? And what does that mean that we won't have the resources to do? So, this is what I'm really hoping to bring these forward as a tool. Again, I have a scope of work with MFA, which is really to do this assessment and then come and make a presentation to the commission. My recommendation is that the commission then consider continuing on with MFA, depending upon what they find, and say, for example, I think that they're going to find we don't have a really good multi-year financial projection that marries up with our capital planning. And so to give us then recommendations that either they can help us with that, or we work with some other firms and really kind of take it to that next step. So I felt like I could take this so far in because my authority is limited, but then it really does become about the strategic guidance that the commission wants to provide to the organization. I think that the other thing that, in the mission versus margin, I find this a really useful tool, and actually used it at the Port of Port Townsend. We mapped every single one of our businesses on there. And what was, I would tell you, shocking to the commission is that every single one of their businesses fell below margin. and so that was a big like, holy cow, we really didn't realize that. So there can be some hard truths that come up with this. There can be some surprises that come up with it too. I've seen that before. And then I think that to beyond looking at any individual business line or any individual asset, is that we really look at the port's portfolio. And one of the things that I say is that, the port doesn't have to make money on everything, but it does need to make money somewhere. And so that's really, as we think about destination waterfront, or even, any number of things of, there's some trade-offs to be had there of perhaps having a higher on margin business that's lower on mission, but it really then provides you the resources to then be able to do the things that are much higher on mission but much lower on the margin. So you look at how you balance that, which again goes right back into that multi-year planning. So I think the port is ready for this kind of level of sophistication. I think we also then need to really bring in that capacity issue as well, and that's going to be a conversation that we will need to continue to have of how much in-house capacity do we have? Do we need to bring in external capacity? If so, how are we going to pay for that, et cetera? So it's a rich field here for us to continue forward with, but those are some of my thoughts and some of the actions that I've taken thus far, and I would love to hear the commissioner's thoughts.
Well, let's take turns. We'll have each person speak, and we're not making a decision here, but just your impressions about this direction of working with MFA. So would anyone, I want to say something. That was so fascinating to hear the case study about Bellingham, because I saw it from the outside. It had never occurred to me what the inside looked like. That was so cool. So I just have to chime in and say that was super interesting. Okay, who'd like to go first? General impressions about this or anything else about their presentation? Yeah,
I'll go
ahead.
first. I'll go first, and I apologize for the phone ringing, but I'm not getting it. In any event, I like the idea. I like the concept because I think it starts to provide us information from the commission to the executive director and to the staff, and everything can be focused on here's how we're looking to do things in moving into the future, and here's how we're rating things. Because there's things we do for public good, there's things we do that we should be doing for revenue generation, but on the other hand, everybody needs to know where we're going, and it's kind of a shotgun approach, kind of, if I can use that term now, where we kind of do these things in somewhat of a process, but I've not been real happy with it. But I think that formalizing it and getting it down into paper and working with people that are understanding this and have been through it, such as Mal Foster Alonji, I think that's all positive. And so I was kind of encouraged by what I heard and saw today. So I think that moving forward, I'd like to see us continue some of that exploration.
Thank you. Commissioner Zita?
So I agree with Commissioner McGregor. This is a good idea. Strongly support bringing Mal Foster Alonji on to help us with our planning. Would like to talk about the process by which we do that. It sounds like the process that's been proposed to us is that Sam will set the scope and then Mal Foster Alonji makes a presentation to us. And it would be useful perhaps for the commission to have some input into the scope.
I heard, Sam, do you want to clarify? I heard it slightly differently. So maybe you should, just say it again. Where are we at and what's the scope definition
yeah, so,
part?
how I would frame it is I've scoped out some initial work with them for them to do an assessment of our Keystone documents and processes. So that's what they would then be bringing back to the commission. As far as future planning efforts and how do we kind of operationalize that and implement that, that is absolutely something that I'd want the commission guidance and direction on. So the scope of work that I've done is basically if the commission decided to do nothing with this would still be useful information for me on the operational side. But this will inform then their assessment will then inform whatever the commission decides to move forward with.
Okay. So it sounds like that right now they're doing an assessment. It was within your purview. You've got them started on that. That presentation will come to the commission, and then the commission will be part of creating the scope of work if you all choose to do that. Of whatever they do with you will be,
Exactly.
be something you do together. Got it. Okay, Joe?
I found the presentation to be, what? I'm sorry.
No,
Oh.
keep going, keep going, and then I'll come back.
I think there's some value here. I don't think the Port of Olympia is that far off track. I mean, I think that the first step in reviewing our Keystone documents, I think that's a good move because then that gives us a grade, if you will, of how far along we are and what we've got left to do. I think, the validity of mission versus margin is real. And that's something that, I think we indirectly consider those kinds of things. We don't really consider port capacity because we leave that up to our executive director. I think I will have to say that in my experience at Port of Olympia, every month is a new adventure. So, in terms of unanticipated opportunities, or how do things like, let's just take the MARAD ships. I mean, bringing ship in and parking it there for 5 years. Is that really a marine terminal function? I mean, I think it is, but I mean, how well does it relate to our existing mission? And really that's about, you might say, communication with the public, other real estate opportunities, for example, just about everything, or even shipping cattle, how does it fit in? And we talk about, somewhere between unanticipated opportunity and, mission versus margin. So, having that a little bit more framework, I think would be helpful.
Cool, thank you. Commissioner Zita, you had another comment?
Yeah, I appreciate you facilitating that clarification, Holly. And it would be nice if the commission could see what has been agreed between the Port and Mall Foster Olangi at this point.
Sure. Sounds like a work session item. So, or,
Yeah, and certainly I can provide that to the commission. If the commission would like to have that at a work session, we can schedule that. We are finalizing contract documents and things. So I'm happy to bring that forward in the future.
Great. Fun. Okay, I had one, I just flashed on that I want to add. Let's get there. They said they had added a couple of slides. I'd love to see what they added, because they said there was the original one that went in your packet and that they added a couple for this meeting. That might be nice to have that to refer
I
back to.
think as they were going, I'm just going to speak up because I was
Yeah.
kind of monitoring what was on the agenda and
Oh,
being
good.
presented for the website. And some of them were more the animation where they were bringing in those
Mhm.
words onto the different. I didn't see anything that I can remember that was a new slide. There were a couple slides that weren't there that they didn't go over that were in the packet. So
Okay.
at the very end, but I think most of it was just animation stuff that he threw in there as a
Okay,
discussion. So that's what I saw. So
great.
So if I could add, I think, the community interest and capacity framework is a really helpful one. And I think that's going to be before us. I mean, I think it is before us right now, in particular with broadband. And so I want to be very clear that, I am, if the commission wishes to enter into that business, and I think that there's plenty of argument for community benefit, et cetera, that that is a completely new line of business. And so when we look at then the capacity to handle that, then we just need to be very mindful and thoughtful and realistic then about what does that mean? If we're going to be laying even dark fiber, do we have the equipment to do that? Do we have the staff to do that? How, what is the regulatory and financial framework that we need to do that in? Who are our partners? What is the competitive field? What's the tax scenario, which is changing on it? So it's there are quite a deal of capacity issues that are raised by this. And so, and by having that conversation, I just want to be clear, that is not a reluctance on my part or anyone on staff's part to be responsive to the commission's desire. It's just like, okay, well then how do we do that? If we are going to add this capacity, then we need to put some budget around it. Does that come out of our existing operating budget? Does it come out of the tax levy budget? If so, would we need to change our tax levy resolution? There are many pieces to that. So it's a framework for us to be able to then have that discussion of, if you want to move this direction, then we need to talk about the particulars of it.
I think it's a case of what do we not want to do then?
Yeah.
I mean, if we have an opportunity here, do we not want to do something over there? And we're still going to be short on capacity anyway, because it's such a different field that we're not used to being in. So anyway.
Yeah. Great.
And just, on the WPPA meetings yesterday, there is a bill that's making its way through the House right now that would actually give retail authority to ports and PUDs, and the WPPA is supportive of that. And then that becomes, which I will tell you, as somebody that has lived in rural communities, particularly, I have plenty of friends in Jefferson County that are still on dial-up. still on dial-up. And so there is absolutely a community need for it. And I think that there's a lot of economic potential that can be unlocked with it. The capacity required to run a retail internet service provider and provide the dark fiber is immense. That'd be an immense leap in capacity. It's not saying that it's impossible, but it's a great increase in our capacity.
Zita?
I don't think we are allowed to provide the internet. I think the state law allows ports to provide dark fiber, and then an ISP or PUD would provide the actual internet. That's something we're not allowed to do.
And that's what I'm saying. There's actually a bill working its way through the House right now that would allow for that retail authority. You're correct that currently we do not have the authority to provide ISP services, but there is a bill that would allow both ports and PUDs to provide that a retail service.
That's not something we've proposed to do, and we got to walk before we can run.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I will also tell you that, you know, in my experience and again in Jefferson County, you could lay as much dark fiber as you want, and there are not going to be any ISPs that come to service that fiber. They just won't move into the market. And I think there's plenty of case studies for that, which is why some people are looking to then say, well, we need a public agency to be able to do that. And that may be something that is, you know, really high on mission, much lower on margin, and that the commission wishes to proceed on. And then we just need to figure out how do we build the capacity to do that.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because it reminds me, there was that other image that they put up on the slides about the data, looking at data going backwards and looking forwards at vision, and the example of the Columbia Gorge. It's such an interesting, when I think about all of you having these conversations and the interface between that forward thinking and what the data is, and then also just your values, like the whole conversation, I was just hearing all these different values for the port that might come into play in terms of how you perceive the community value or values of your community and your port values. I think there's going to be a lot of rich discussions to be had here. Yeah. So any other comments in the few minutes we have before our next break? Okay. Well, this has been really fun to hear. And Sam, thank you for bringing them to talk with us today. And friends, would you like to have a little extra time on your break? Or would you like to just take 15 minutes and have me calculate the math? Otherwise, we would come back at 3:30 and get started.
You're the facilitator.
Okay, I'd say we make it less math and more stretching. So how about if we come back at 3:30?
Okay.
Yeah, and then we'll go on with our day. And you guys, you're doing so good. It's going great.
Hey, Aspen, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is the section that we're gonna have Jerry and Rudy in on.
Oh, okay. I will let Rudy in. There we go.
And is it like a sauna in this this building? It is like,
Have you gone into the bathroom?
bathroom is like.
Okay, the bathroom is actually a sauna. I think it's broken or something, the air in there, because I walked in and I like got this wave of heat and was like shocked.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Well,
That's just an added benefit the port commissioners have added to your amenities.
Thank you to our wellness program, is that
Yeah, there you go.
you've added a sauna in the bathroom.
Aspen, you can check the thermostats, but it was really, really cold in there last week. And so we had them turned way up. And then I think they came in and worked on them late last week. And so it's probably warmer in there now, but
Oh, okay, that makes
thermostats
sense.
should be between like 0 and 1. And so there's like 3 of them there in the area if you want to check them to make sure that they're not turned way up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we have about an hour left in our agenda here. If we need all that time, because really all we're doing in this next section. Oh, Rudy, nice to see you there in outer space.
Outer space.
I just love the backgrounds.
Here we go.
They're
Rudy
so-
in space.
Rudy's in space. He just in a cow pasture. It's hilarious. Yeah, have you all seen the new Zoom things where people can put like little crowns and ears and stuff? That's really distracting. It's not- okay, so we've got about an hour left. Cedar, are you there? I thought I saw you, but maybe I didn't see you. Cedar, you there? Are you with us?
Yeah, I just had to shut the door. Dog's barking.
Okay. I hear ya. So we got the dog under control. Jerry's the cat under control. Okay. We have then an opportunity to look at processes for coordinating our work together. This is really a review. It should have been, it was all in your packet as well. So as you may recall, we've been working over the last year or two on really making our own processes for how the commission works together and how the commission works with management to create as much efficiency and effectiveness and coordination as possible so that we can spend most of our time talking about the substantive work that you all do and less time worrying about process. So we're going to just review what we had developed and make sure we're all on the same page, see if people have questions. If we have differences in terms of how we understand things, we're still going to be practicing just really approaching that from a place of appreciation, curiosity, and respect, really high levels of respect, because that's how this is going to be just really where we stay on the same team, even if we have different understanding of things. And then we just keep discussing till we get clear. We also do have Anne coming tomorrow. So if there are things that we want to flag for her to help us with, we can. But besides that, remember our objective here is, I thought it's really about how we work together, again, to make the most out of our precious time. And to do that and creating a culture in this port that really reflects who we are. And what I know about all of you is that your dedication to service is extremely high. I have to say, I have been so just impressed both with the management and with the commissioners. Like, that is never a question on the table. You all are all here to fulfill this mission. So now we get to do the fun part, the little processy stuff. So Sam or Aspen, if you could pop up the PowerPoint and ask, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through each slide. Sam's going to present. We'll pause and see if there's any clarifications we need to make. You could also say things like, oh, here's one place where I see us really rocking this, where I see us really doing this well. That is also a fine thing to chime in with. Okay, Sam, if you would
Great.
please.
Thank you. So Aspen, you can go next slide. So this is just an overview of kind of our typical workflow for the commission throughout the year. Of course, last year that was disrupted in many ways, and there are still a lot of uncertainties for this coming year. So things such as the Thurston County Chamber auction. It's likely going to take place in some format. I'm not sure. Definitely some of the community events, like in May and the summer, we have those budgeted. So if there are ways that we can do those in a modified form that complies with COVID safety protocols, then we're positioned to do that. But there's just a lot of uncertainty on it. But for the generalized flow is that, in January, you do the election of officers, the, housekeeping for the year, and the delegation of authority, you bring those forward. In February is typically then where we're having a retreat like this, which is then where the staff is saying, okay, you've passed a budget and now here's our work plan to accomplish major pieces of that. The work plan is not meant to be exhaustive, but it is kind of the projects and higher level initiatives. Then we have, moving throughout this year, I don't need to hit every point, but we do have our budget process beginning kind of officially in October. As we did this last year, we had some earlier conversations about commission priorities. We had those in August and September of this last year. And so we'll, trying to get a jump on that budgeting process. Then getting to November, which is when we have the budget adoption, then, if we take some of the things we heard from MFA and wanted to then be adding on some, updates to the comprehensive scheme, kind of creating that whole annual package that the commission might want to, we can certainly look at that, doing that for this coming year as well. But this just is kind of like the general flow of the year.
Thank you. Great. So any offerings on this from any of the commissioners? Okay, let's keep going. Next slide.
Great. Next slide. There you go. So this one, if you recall, last year we had two slides, one for commission meeting and for the work session, but now we're on the same schedule. They both occur on Monday. So in some ways that helps simplify for staff because we're not keeping track of multiple deadlines. But in general, this is the flow, is that the leadership team, we review the PowerPoints as a team on Wednesday. On that Friday, then I have time set aside where I look and review all the packet materials. Sometimes that does bleed over to Monday, but typically looking at those on, making sure that we have all the PowerPoints and materials in on Friday. And then the packet is published and sent out to the commission on Tuesday. We then have that agreed to deadline on Thursday, that if there's any changes that an individual commissioner might want to make, or any materials supply, that is by 3 p.m. on Thursday. And then we have the meeting on the following Monday.
Okay, any offerings on this slide?
Well, I would just say that, this is the onerous part, this schedule. And, it's onerous for, I can't speak for the other two commissioners, but, we try to abide by this, but there's back doors, if you will. I mean, a commissioner can bring a topic to a work session or a commission meeting, as long as it's not a special work session. But the only disadvantage is you have to show up, you might say, without a packet, because the packet, having something in the packet allows people, commissioners and the public, to look at it ahead of time. So this layout makes sense, but I'm not saying it's necessarily the easiest thing to abide by, but it's really required in the spirit of, transparency with the public.
Yeah, yes, and Commissioner, I actually speak to then, on the next couple slides of how things can be added to. So I'll speak to that topic of somebody adding something at a work session or a regular meeting. So I'll speak to that. And it is. I went back and looked this year. I had Jesse and both Jesse and Aspen look at how we did for last year. And, we had the packet out on time, every single meeting except one, and that was the March 23rd meeting. And I think all of us can recall what was happening at that point where we weren't even sure that we were going to have a meeting at that point. So that was right when the close down for the pandemic was happening. So but we have gotten the packets out on time every meeting in 2020 except one.
It's fantastic.
Right?
And then how has it been with the no changes or additions after 3 p.m.? I'm actually just curious, commissioners, have you been able to hit that Thursday deadline most of the time? Yeah.
Can I interject there a little bit?
Yeah.
When you look at this schedule, it's the Wednesday is when the team starts talking about it as a PowerPoint. And then the packet is published by Tuesday. Well, that's 5 work days. And a lot of things can happen in those 5 work days. And a lot of things can happen even after that Tuesday, which is another 5 days until we get to the actual meeting. And so, it says no changes or additions after 3 p.m. We have to remain somewhat flexible on that. I don't think that should be a hard line, but I think it needs to be most of the time. We need to make sure that we have our packet together by Thursday with no changes or additions. We can always add, as Commissioner Downing said, we can always add on Mondays to a regular work session or a regularly scheduled commission meeting. It's difficult because it is somewhat of a surprise at walking something on to the agenda. But we also have to realize that on that Monday of the meeting, we can take stuff off the agenda too if it's not ready or needs to be changed for any reason. So we have to maintain some flexibility, but the key is to try to be as transparent and have everything that we're going to discuss as best as we can. I'd say 99% of it on the agenda in time for the public to have a chance to review. So I think that for the most part it works, but we have to remain some flexibility. It can't be a hard cast and concrete type of rule, in my opinion. So
Right. And Holly, can I respond to that?
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, you're right, Commissioner McGregor. The commission rules resolution say that we can actually make revisions to the packet right up to the time of the meeting. And so that's probably not the best wording on that Thursday bullet of no changes or addition. I think it probably should be more of like if you want us to include something in the packet, particularly coming from commissioners to staff, that would be, but the rules allow for revisions to be made right up to the time of the meeting. And if, for example, just this last regular meeting, we had one of our presenters who just that morning said, I'm ill, I can't make the meeting, and so we put out a revision to the agenda that morning. And I think our rules allow for that. So yeah, probably the wording on that Thursday is not exactly correct.
right, the agenda is actually formulated when we approve it at the meeting itself. So
Right.
yeah.
And I remember this conversation really clearly because of just also all of you really listening to Jessie and what her experience was and how to make it so that was a more sane, basically workflow for her and so I think that was the other thing that was reflected here in this scheduling is how to make sure that your administrative support staff is also that we're treating them with thoughtfulness. Okay, Sam, do you want to look at the next ones? Because it seems like that's where we are kind of moving into like how do people get things onto the agenda after this? Yeah.
Commissioner Zeta had a question.
Oh, sorry, Zita, I gotta keep flipping up and down. Go ahead.
Thank you to Commissioner McGregor for emphasizing the importance of having everything in the packet well in advance as much as possible. Of course, we understand when things may need to be removed, but last minute additions are not good for public transparency and accountability. I completely agree with him.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of unity on this point about that there's some flexibility. Of course, we understand that. And the importance, as you just said, Zita, about transparency, right? So that we have it, so that folks know what's coming, and this ethic of no surprises for each other as well. Okay, Sam, so are we ready? Should we move on to the next
slide?
Okay.
So then this is from the rules resolution, and again, this is the agenda setting process of how the commission can, an individual commissioner can get an item on the agenda. So there are lots of contractual things and things that are generated by staff that we're tracking. We're now giving you a preview of those in our every other week work sessions. That schedule is always subject to change, but we are trying to give you a preview of what we see coming. I'm then working with the commission president to set up those agendas. Okay, here are the things that are going to be ready that are more not always perfunctory in nature, but more of the kind of the regular business of the port. We have contracts to approve. We have an interlocal agreement to bring forward, et cetera. So then we look at that, and then what I'm really working on with the commission president is, will staff have things ready? So we're looking at not only the content of things, but when we'll have them ready to go on. Then other commissioners may request at a regular meeting an agenda can be added by either sending that request to the executive director, and then I'll discuss that with the commission president ahead of time and say, Commissioner X would like to have this added. We can talk about, okay, when would that make sense? Or, would you like to delay that? Maybe you need more information, et cetera. Or then, as Commissioner McGregor pointed out, is that, any commissioner has the right to move to amend the agenda at a regular meeting by adding an additional item. And then if it's approved by the majority of the commission, then it's added to the agenda. In that case, we won't have materials ready to go and be able to project it at that point. It's just, we kind of have things, particularly in this remote environment, where we have things set up and ready to go. But these are the ways that the other commissioners that are not the commission president can then seek to have something added to the agenda.
Okay, any offerings on this slide? Yeah, Zita.
Sometimes commissioners will discuss at a meeting that we all agree something is important to have at a future meeting, and then 2 or 3 commissioners will agree, yes, let's have this at a future meeting. This is just a reality check to see if others are agreeing that this is something that we do.
I can weigh in on that if you don't mind. For sure, I agree with Commissioner Zeta that if at least 2 commissioners say we'd like to hear about a so-and-so topic, that should be happening, subject to, the capacity of the staff and subject to, the calendar, whether or not some other event needs to happen first, and then we can have that discussion. So things like that do come up. And the only other thing I want to say about this slide, Sam, when you say topics scheduled for agenda items agreed to by, I gotta move my commission president, executive director. there's two kinds of agenda items. There's the kind that Zita just spoke of when two commissioners, informally agree that we should talk about something. And the expectation is port staff puts together a presentation. But then there's the other kind of agenda item that a commissioner is ready to do. That it's the commissioner's topic, and they might prepare a slide or two to reinforce whatever point they want to make. So that's a different type of agenda item, and there should be very few circumstances where that doesn't automatically go on a commission evening, commission meeting where there's enough time to do that.
Yeah, Commissioner Zeta?
So I agree with Commissioner Downing, and it would be useful to have these other circumstances reflected in the record.
So what I'm going to suggest, and this is the complete parallel to how the Thurston County does it, is that if the commission as a whole wants to add either a work session topic or an agenda topic, they actually make a motion to that. And then that's absolutely then reflected in the meeting minutes. And then it's very easy for staff to pick up. Lacking that, and I'm just going to be frank here with the commission, it is sometimes confusing as to whether or not the commission has reached an agreement. And so that is never a lack of willingness for your staff to be responsive. It's just that we sometimes leave a meeting and we actually don't know what decision was made. So I think the best way to address that then is if you have something that you want to add to a future agenda, just make a motion and then it gets recorded and it's really clear.
Well, I mean, that's fine. That's fine. And I want to encourage my fellow commissioners that I guess we'll get tomorrow, we'll get another dose of Robert's Rules of Order. So, making motions can happen at any commission meeting. So when you want a topic, sure, make a motion and second it, but also want to reiterate that you need a special carve out, perhaps, Sam, and Commissioner Zita wants to memorialize that if a single commissioner has a topic and is planning on creating their own slides and PowerPoint, that there's very few circumstances where that would not be put on an agenda automatically.
And I think that's a good thing to talk to Ann about tomorrow. Just again, all I'm trying to do is just to be really clear as to what direction that we're being given.
Okay, let's, Zita, I see your hand. Let's flag this definitely for something to talk about with Ann. And I have a clarifying question as well for you, Joe, but I'd like to hear from Zita first.
So the example that Commissioner Downing made was not an example that I brought up, just for clarification.
Oh, okay.
Okay, sorry, Commissioner Zita, if you want to restate, I'm sorry, I'll stay out of it. I guess stay out of the middle of it. So do you want to restate what you would like to see? Anything different than what's being presented?
It appears we all agree that when commissioners agree at a meeting that something should be on a future agenda, that is one way of getting something on an agenda. That option does not appear here, and I'd like it to.
And can I weigh in on this a little bit? We have, during our regular work sessions, regularly scheduled, we do have an item on there where we're allowed to have discussion on future topics or what, that kind of thing. And, and I think what I'm hearing, and I hope I'm not misstating it, is that I think that sometimes when I leave those meetings after we've had a discussion on putting something on a future agenda item, I'm walking away saying, well, did we agree to it or not? So I think for clarity for staff, I think that what's being offered is that we take a formal vote on putting it on a future agenda is a good way that it gets in the minutes that it was voted on and approved, and it becomes a part of the record and not just part of the discussion, which our minutes are action meetings. or should be, and therefore it is an action we're taking. In a work session, it might be a little bit more difficult because we don't take action in a work session, but we can talk about that, and maybe there's some clarity that needs to come to our rules resolution here as we're going to deal with that at some point in time too as well. So, and I agree that we should be able to do something like that.
That sounds great, Commissioner McGregor. We've had some productive conversations in work sessions where we have had at least 2 commissioners agree that it would be good to discuss something at a future meeting. And when that happens, that's useful. And if we could formalize that, that would be even more useful.
Good. So I'm hearing unity on this point, and something then that we could add into this slide ultimately as a reference. And then we'll check with Ann tomorrow about this whole thing about extra slides and materials from commissioners, okay? Because I think we should keep going, because that's a whole other topic.
Great. We can go to the next slide.
Mhm.
And this is for work sessions, and this is, as Commissioner McGregor alluded to, is more explicit in your in the operating, or excuse me, in the commission rules resolution.
Yep.
So again, topics can and agenda items were agreed to by the commission president, executive director. We're working on scheduling those things. I am again now keeping that running list of topics to make sure that I'm, we're not dropping anything. Then it does say explicitly in your rules resolution that in a regular session under other business that the commission can approve future work topic sessions. So this is another opportunity for you to say, I'd really like to have a work session on topic X, and then the commission you make a motion to that, the commission can vote on it, and then it's very clear that that's being generated by the commission as a whole, and then we will add it to that list and work on scheduling it. Again, in the same rule applies that any commissioner can make a motion to amend a work session agenda, and if it's agreed to by the majority, then the agenda is so amended. But then there's no materials available for that. So, any questions on this?
Okay, let's keep going.
Great. Okay, and this is the meeting minute process, and I'm also going to bring in Aspen towards the end of this because she attended a webinar with Ann McFarland this year on best practices for the production of meeting minutes for public agencies. So the first step is that the commission coordinator sends out the draft action minutes to commissioners as soon as she can after the meeting, and she tells you then what the due date is for having any corrections back to her. The commissioners then individually send corrections back to the commission coordinator, and then if the correction is offered, you then point to the timestamp and say this happened at 1 hour and 45 minutes. This is here. You actually got this wrong. The commission did not vote for it, or whatever. But you point to that so she doesn't have to go looking through the whole video. Then the commission coordinator is responsible for compiling those into the final draft. I take one last look at it, and then it's added to the packet. They're then put on the consent agenda, and if they are somehow not acceptable, any commissioner can pull them out of the consent agenda for discussion before the vote. And that's a little bit different than some of the things where it's been kind of sent back. So I think it's just that this is the process that we agreed to, is that, if there were a correction to the actions, then you pull it off the consent agenda, you have a discussion about the correction to the action, and then you take care of it in that meeting. So before we go further, then I'm going to have Aspen step in here and pull up an example of what action minutes and how we are going to be moving forward with putting our meeting minutes together.
So this is an example of the December 14th meeting minutes, which have already been approved. I just went through and adjusted some things to reflect how we're hoping to move forward with meeting minutes. So this entire first page really stays the same kind of concept of noting the time that the meeting started, who attended, and small summarizing sentences of the different topics. What's mostly changed is instead of listing a very wordy summary of whatever was presented, we're simply going to put something along the lines of this director presented this topic, and then to clearly note what motion was taken, roll call if that's been requested, and any amendments if that's necessary as well. Excuse me. So this is just an example here for this authorization of a contract. Instead of saying basically what Rachel presented, I would just say Planning, Public Works and Environmental Director Rachel Jameson gave a brief presentation on contract number, so on and so forth. And then we would go on to say that the commissioners asked questions and had a discussion and what movement was made. So yeah, when I attended the webinar with Ann McFarland, she really emphasized a need for simplicity in meeting minutes to help keep things as efficient as possible for the commission, the executive director, and for myself. So she just thought it's best practice to keep very clear action minutes and to focus on actions as opposed to what was said. So that's kind of what this document here will reflect. And I'm open to any conversation you guys have.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, Commissioner Zita.
Well, Aspen, this looks terrific. I want to thank you for your showing us these two examples, and the example of the action minutes is perfectly in line with what we agreed to last year. There's no need to reproduce staff paragraphs that are already in the packet, and this looks great. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I have a comment. So what do you do, Aspen? Maybe I missed it, but how do you show public comment in the minutes in any way?
The same way that we were previously showing public comment. So we would say however many people gave public comment. So we're not going to give the words that they said, but just that 3 people, let's say, gave public comment. Commissioner Zito.
So that's an aspect that we should discuss a little more. The commission and staff agreed in March that written public comments would be appended to the meeting minutes while we're having online meetings during COVID. We started that practice in April and continued it until late last year, and then it suddenly just quit with no discussion or decision by the commission, which was pretty mysterious. So there's a couple of questions about what was the process by which that agreement ended, and what are our priorities and goals. The state legislature does include written public comments in the written public record. So there is a strong precedent for the agreement that we all made in March and the practice that we undertook starting in April. So we need to discuss this.
Commissioner Zita, I guess my only comment is that if it's not in a resolution or if it's not written down anywhere, then it's superfluous. So, I mean, I guess I have to ask you, where is it written down? You say the commissioners discussed it, but That's not my recollection. I don't believe it's in any resolution, but maybe it is, and then you could show me. I think that's, I think it's not in the resolution. So, when we didn't consciously vote to expand our coverage of public comment, either verbal or written. So,
It was in a resolution drafted by staff when all the COVID changes happened, and we agreed to it.
okay,
So-
well, okay, go ahead. Commissioner.
I was just going to say that if it's in a resolution, then Commissioner Zeta, can you provide us with that resolution? Because I don't remember. And as I said at the previous meeting, if you can give me some information on where it is on what meeting, because there were 4 meetings in March, and I'm just not sure where to find it in any of the tapes. And if you've found it in the tapes, I'd like to have the timeline so I can go back and listen to the discussion. So.
Yeah, it's the staff had presented this to us in writing when they made the COVID changes. And I'm sure that the staff can find that document that we agreed to in March and started implementing in April.
So you're saying it's in a resolution in March? That's
We passed a bunch of new policies in March, new meeting procedures because of COVID. And I'm sure that staff can track that down.
Well, if you have an idea, if it's in March, there's 4 meetings, I can try to track it down myself by looking at the agenda, because the agenda will have listed the resolutions that we passed during that time. So I'll take a look at it, and we can have further discussion on that at another time.
And then the other question is, after we agreed to this process and implemented it in April, it's a mystery as to who made the decision to stop that practice.
Okay.
Oh,
So it's,
okay.
yeah.
No comment.
Joe, you had a comment there or no?
No.
Okay. So
I would say
sure. Go ahead.
the decision was probably made by Aspen and myself, because she was asking questions. Why are we including written comments when we don't even include comments of people who actually attended the meeting? And we went back to the commission rules and operating agreement, and it said we wouldn't include those. And so we cannot find anywhere that a motion was made or a resolution was passed that said we would do that. And, Aspen was researching how do we make our minutes more effective, and going back to the guidelines of Ann McFarland, and it says, like, keep them concise, don't include all this stuff. So I would say that the decision was made by Aspen and myself, that we're following the commission, guidance that we've been given to keep the minutes concise.
So it would be useful to see the COVID changes that staff presented to the commission. I think it may be March 23rd, where that suggestion was made, and the commission agreed to append the written public comments to the meeting minutes. That would be the first step. And then the next step is for the commission to discuss the virtue of actually doing what we did for most of last year, and what the state legislature also does. Is this a time for us to have that discussion?
Well, I think what I'm hearing is that you need a little more information, and that Bill, it sounds like you were willing to take a look at that to see. And Zita, I'm hearing you say that you believe it was on March 23rd. So Bill, if you're still willing to do that, I'm thinking there's really 2 issues. One is just like, what did we decide? And then we all have a little bit of a different understanding of what we decided. And it sounds like staff proceeded when Aspen came on to do what they understood was the decision. But Zita, I think you're bringing up another important point, which is, regardless of what you decided when, which we should know, we should find out what you did decide, is like, what would be the best practices? So I'm thinking this might be another thing to just talk to Ann about tomorrow. And you can always change your minds, but why don't we start with that? What did you do? Let's get clear on what you decided, and then we can talk about what best practices would be tomorrow.
That sounds good, Holly. And then the third question is,
Mhm.
What is our process for changing procedures? When we institute a practice, for example, of publishing all written public comments in our minutes, what is the process for changing something like that?
Sure.
Is that something that should come to the commission, that we should discuss, that we should acknowledge, or can it just vanish with no discussion or decision?
Well, again, I think in this case, it's a great question. And I think that's why we're doing this process today, about going through what are your processes, because you can change your processes, but you need to know what they are, right? So it sounds like in this case, you have different memories, which happens, you have different understanding about what happened, and you have staff who are trying to interpret and do the right thing. So I think you've all it's sort of like when you're looking at the elephant and you're all grabbing a different part of the elephant right now. So let's start with what the data said, meaning the minutes. And just to affirm exactly what you're saying is that it's that you need to be in alignment and make sure that you are voting on changes to your processes, right? I think that's the big point here, is that you can't just create or disappear processes unless you're having a discussion about it, which is what we're doing today. Yeah,
Great, Billy. And so I hope that we will agree that when changes happen, they don't happen mysteriously, that we have communication and transparency with each other.
Yeah, that ethic of no surprises. We're all working on that. And I think balanced with that is that just giving each other the benefit of the doubt and giving each other a lot of grace. I mean, I think we all have to just keep remembering that in general, we have to assume good intentions and that people are going to make honest mistakes and that we can talk about it. That's where we're at as humans, always. So I want to suggest, Zita, do you feel heard? Are we ready to, because if we can, I'd love to make it all the way through these.
Kind of. I have asked this question quite a few times and I have,
okay.
It keeps getting shoved under the rug. So I look forward
say it one more time and I'll make sure I get it. Go ahead. What's the
Yeah.
question?
So what did we agree in late March?
Mm-hmm.
Let's confirm what our practice was, that we actually did publish public comments in the written record from April till sometime at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
What do we want to do as our best practice moving forward?
Right.
And how do we make decisions like this? And is it okay to just change things without a discussion at the commission level?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, Jerry?
Well, and as I said earlier, I take ownership of making this decision because there was a lack of decision by the commission. If you had taken your operating rules and said, let's revise them, we want to have all written comments in there, and we would have revised them, or a motion was made to do that, we would have something to go back on to look at what commission direction was given. Lack of that, we have only to go by what you have adopted. And when Aspen and I looked for any motion or a revision of those, there was nothing. So we went back to what we have. And as you recall, I actually was bringing to the commission another revision to those. And it was pulled from the commission calendar at the night of the meeting because you guys said you weren't ready to discuss it. So I have not brought it back until I've been asked by the commission to bring back recommendations that we were making. Again, without any adoption by the commission, we are just going by what you have adopted.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate your clarification. Okay, so I think that everybody, I want to just say that what we're getting into that place of restating what we've already said. So I just want to acknowledge that I heard all of you, that how we have experienced this situation. Bill has offered to look back at those March 23rd and moving forward, if we need to get more clear on how we change our processes, we'll just make sure to get more clear on it. So Joe, can you bring us home here so we can keep going? And you're muted, dear.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, this is the perfect place to address Commissioner Zeta's concerns. And, I suggest that all three commissioners go back and look and see if somebody can find that particular piece of information that led us to that might have led us to the written comments decision. I think that, looking at the positive side of the process is kind of beautiful, because Aspen creates the minutes, then the minutes come to the commission for approval. And throughout the course of the year, we may have delayed approval a couple of times. We basically approved the minutes. And so, all those minutes, whether including written records or not, have been approved by the Port Commission and are part of the permanent record. So, we can move forward with adjustments if we need to, but, I suggest that all three of us go look and see if we can find, refresh our memories between now and tomorrow. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Yes, Zeta.
I do have a question about the process of approving minutes. And I want to thank Aspen again for working with the commission on this. She sends us the draft. We send her our red lines, and then a final version appears in the next meeting. And sometimes it's difficult to track which of our red lines were accepted and which were not. And I have requested that the final edit be provided in red line form to the commissioners so we can track those changes. I hope that's not too much extra work. I know that the staff is technically completely capable of doing that. It would be very useful in seeing how things change from version to version.
So why don't we, thank you for offering that question. It's different than what you've got right now. And what I'd like to suggest we do is let's flag that one also for Anne tomorrow. And about the red line form, because it would add another step to your process. So before we do that, why don't we check with Anne? And but thank you for raising that as another piece. Okay, Sam, do we have more on this slideshow? I guess I could look at my original copy.
That was the last slide, Holly.
Oh, that was the last slide.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we have a couple things for Anne tomorrow. The question about how minutes get, how the edits of minutes are handled. We have the question of commission presentations, and we have the question that just came up about what happened on March 23rd regarding and just best practices around adding public comment as an addendum to meeting minutes. So what you decided, how you changed that, and then what, and the practice of it in general. I think that was the main stuff. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else on our processes before we check out? Because look, it's 4:17. We might actually get out of here on time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead then and have us do a final closing comments. So anything you'd like to share about how you felt about the meeting, how you maybe something that was a moment you really enjoyed or that you thought was especially interesting, and anything you want to say about how we did on our own processes about just respect and appreciation and humor and graciousness as we are here to serve together. So anybody, actually, I'm going to call on you because you're here on my screen, and I'm going to start with Rudy. Ha ha ha, Rudy, you get to go first.
And I was prepared for that.
You know me too well.
Yes.
Pick on Rudy. Yeah.
Well, because I recall what you stated in the meeting to bring my best self, I will bring my best self and say, I appreciate everyone participating, and I thought it was a productive meeting, and I hope that we will carry that into tomorrow as well.
Thanks, Rudy. Jerry?
Yeah, I think these conversations are conversations that need to happen every year, make sure we're all on the same page. And you know, it's really helpful for staff moving forward to have like those motions made or things that are adopted. So it gives us clear direction.
Thank you. Sam?
Indeed, I thought it was very productive. I'm grateful that the commission appears equally enthusiastic about the work of MFA and possibilities there. So I think I'm looking forward to diving into that.
Thank you. Bill?
Yeah, I had a long list here. No, I'll shorten it down. I appreciate the opportunity to get together and talk in a civil manner, understanding each of us have our own biases, our own ideas and concepts, but it's always nice to put them out there and hopefully respect each other for what we bring to the table, and also to provide clarity to staff on some of these things, because as I said before, when I leave a meeting, sometimes I go, what did we just decide? Because I don't know if we made a decision. And so anyway, I'm looking forward to tomorrow. And I think that what MFA, Mal Foster Alonji, presented today gave me some interesting perspectives I hadn't thought of. So that was good. I appreciate and all the work the staff has put into this as well. So thank you to Sam, Jerry, and Rudy, and the rest of the staff that have participated or will participate tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Aspen?
Well, I do really want to thank the commission for considering my suggestions to the meeting minutes. That's, I think, going to really help me moving forward, especially since I'm still learning how to do meeting minutes and whatnot. So I really appreciate you guys having dialogue with me about that. And Holly, I did want to thank you too. I think that your positivity and thoughtfulness really brings a great light to our meetings. So I just really appreciate you being here.
Zita?
Well, I want to thank everyone for a useful conversation. And Holly, I think we need a facilitator at every port meeting. So let's just hire you on. I'm looking forward to Mal Foster Alonji working with us on our decision-making process. We can benefit from that.
Joe?
I think we're working in a tough environment because I think the folks from MFA said it, but it's challenging to be, in government and speak plainly. But at the same time, the framework and the process helps us get things done, like the discussion of the minutes, like the discussion of getting the packet ready and all the other process things. So hats off to port staff for living in this environment, and also hats off and thank you for helping us commissioners make us aware that things are not as clear to you as they are to us in our head. Therefore, the process is important to convey the message, and always within the framework of public accountability, public disclosure, transparency, all those things. We have to operate a certain way. We still want to get work done. I'm always the person that, because I come from a business background, I'd rather just get the work done. But I realize that government is not like that. You have to have a very well-ordained process. So I appreciate, going into this, I said, why do we have to have a retreat? But, now that I'm here and participating, I think it's very valuable for us to, just like a retreat is, to get away from your daily work and just, ponder what you do the other 364 days of the year as your, whatever your role might be. So I think this is very valuable. And now that I'm all warmed up, and I look forward to the rest of the session. Thanks.
Yay. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I think what I am seeing, as I'm sure many of you are, is just that in this time, it's so important that we do our very best to model how we want the world to be. And believe it or not, I am the president of a very small board that is our flood advisory committee here in Whatcom County in little Nooksack. And I just became the chair And I chaired the meeting, and then I thought of it afterwards, and I was like, I want to just the way I want to show up is with as much grace and civility and warmth and professionalism as possible, and just to set my sights about how do I want to be in service. And I just feel like it's such an important thing for us all right now to think about, because we affect the world. I do think that we affect the world by how we show up. And Joe, like when I watch you sometimes facilitating those meetings, because, I pop in every once in a while, and I just think you're doing such a great job. And each of you, when I see you showing up with grace, I just feel really impressed and proud to be associated with you. So that's what I have to say. And I hope you guys have a great evening, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow. And yeah, bright and early with Anne. Will she bring, let's play some bets. Will she bring the dinosaurs onto the Zoom? Yes?
Oh, yeah.
No?
Yeah, yes, I will. Yeah, she will.
Okay. All right. See you all tomorrow. Bye.